On a humid morning in early March 1962, the tarmac at Guam's airport was bustling with activity. Amidst this, a Lockheed L-1049 Super Constellation, a long-range aircraft revered for its capabilities, was being prepared for a significant journey. This aircraft, operated by the Flying Tiger Line, was chartered by the U.S. military to transport troops and their equipment to Clark Air Base in the Philippines. The flight, numbered 739, was one segment of a multi-leg journey that had begun in California and was to ultimately end in Saigon. The Lockheed Constellation, known affectionately as the Connie, was a sight to behold with its distinctive triple-tail design and dolphin-shaped fuselage. On this day, it stood ready, its gleaming exterior reflecting the morning sun, as ground crew busily loaded the last of the cargo. The atmosphere was charged with a sense of purpose and urgency, common to military operations, yet there was an undercurrent of casual camaraderie among the crew and passengers. Flight 739 was carrying 93 U.S. soldiers, 3 South Vietnamese, and 11 civilian crew members. The military personnel were mostly engineers and technical specialists, tasked with setting up communication and logistics bases in Vietnam. The flight crew, seasoned and skilled, were well versed in the demands and responsibilities of such important missions. The captain of the flight, an experienced pilot with years of flying with both commercial and military charters, performed a final walk-around inspection of the aircraft. He checked under the wings, examined the tires, and glanced over the engines, ensuring everything was in order before the long overwater flight. His co-pilot and navigator were already inside the cockpit, going through the pre-flight checklist, their voices a mixture of professional focus and occasional light-hearted remarks. Inside the cabin, the flight attendants briefed the soldiers on safety procedures. Although the mood among the troops was generally relaxed, many of them used to the routines of deployment, the flight attendants noted the attentive seriousness with which the soldiers listened to the emergency instructions. In the cargo hold, the last pieces of equipment were secured, the manifest checked and rechecked, to ensure that all was accounted for. Once boarding was complete, the crew closed the doors, and the captain made his way to the cockpit, signaling to the control tower their readiness to depart. Clearance was given, and the engines roared to life, a powerful, reassuring sound to both passengers and crew. The aircraft taxied to the runway, the early morning light casting long shadows on the ground. As the Super Constellation lined up on the runway, the captain made a final announcement over the intercom, his voice calm and confident. He reviewed the flight plan with the passengers, noting the expected flying time and weather conditions, which were favorable. There was a palpable sense of anticipation as the aircraft's engines revved up, the propellers spinning faster until they were just blurs. With a smooth surge forward, the plane began its takeoff roll, quickly gaining speed. The soldiers watched through the windows as Guam's landscape began to blur, the sensation of liftoff bringing a momentary weightlessness that contrasted with the heavy reality of their mission. As the aircraft climbed into the clear blue sky, it banked gently towards the west, setting course over the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The flight was expected to be routine, with hours of flying over open water. The crew settled into their roles, monitoring the aircraft's systems and maintaining regular communication with air traffic control. Below them, the Pacific stretched out endlessly, its surface a deep blue, occasionally broken by the white caps of waves. As Flight 739 reached cruising altitude, the captain switched on the autopilot, the aircraft humming steadily along its charted path. In the cabin, soldiers dozed or chatted quietly, the drone of the engines a constant backdrop. Everything seemed normal, the flight progressing as countless others had before. Yet, unbeknownst to those on board, this would be the last time Flight 739 would be seen or heard from. In the hours to follow, somewhere over the vast, mysterious depths of the Pacific, the aircraft and all its passengers would vanish without a trace, leaving behind only questions and a lingering sense of unease that would echo through the annals of aviation history. As Flight 739 steadily ascended to its cruising altitude, the vast Pacific Ocean unfolded below, a seemingly endless expanse of blue. The Lockheed L-1049 Super Constellation, a marvel of its time, was designed for long-range missions just like this, equipped with state-of-the-art navigation systems and powerful engines that hummed rhythmically, reassuringly. Inside the cockpit, the crew engaged in routine monitoring of their instruments, ensuring all systems operated within normal parameters. The flight path from Guam to the Philippines was a well-traveled route, typically uneventful, yet requiring constant vigilance due to its vast overwater stretches. The captain, a seasoned pilot with extensive experience in both commercial and military aviation, occasionally exchanged light-hearted banter with his co-pilot, breaking the monotony of the flight. However, their professionalism never waned. Each gauge and radar sweep was diligently observed, each communication with air traffic control crisp and clear. Inside the cabin, the mood among the passengers, mostly U.S. soldiers accustomed to the rigors of deployment, was one of subdued anticipation. Some tried to catch some sleep, resting against the rumble of the aircraft, while others read books or played cards, making the best of the hours ahead. The flight attendants moved quietly along the aisles, offering refreshments and checking on their charges with practiced smiles and gentle reassurances. Approximately 2 hours into the flight, as Flight 739 approached the midpoint of its journey over the open water, the captain made routine contact with air traffic control. Reporting their position, altitude, and status, everything was confirmed to be on track, with no deviations from the flight plan. The skies were clear, and weather reports indicated smooth sailing ahead. The controller at the other end acknowledged the update with a standard response, wishing them a continued safe journey. This communication, routine and unremarkable, would later be scrutinized and replayed, as it was the last confirmed transmission received from Flight 739. At the time, however, there was no indication of anything amiss. The aircraft continued on its path, the autopilot maintaining a steady course, the engine's steady drone a testament to their reliability. But as the minutes ticked by, an unseen and escalating issue was unfolding. Unbeknownst to the crew and passengers, a critical situation was developing that would soon culminate in the mysterious disappearance of Flight 739. The aircraft, now a mere speck against the vastness of the Pacific, was heading towards an uncertain fate. The last radar contact with the aircraft showed it continuing along its intended flight path. Then, inexplicably, the blip that represented the mighty constellation faded from the radar screens, vanishing without a trace. The disappearance was so sudden, so complete, that air traffic controllers initially doubted their equipment, frantically adjusting settings and calling out to the aircraft with growing urgency. "Flight 739, this is Control. Please come in," crackled over the radio, the controller's voice betraying a hint of concern. There was no response, only static filled the airwaves. Repeated calls, each more desperate than the last, met with the same eerie silence. As the realization set in that the aircraft was no longer on radar and not responding to communications, a chill ran through the control room. Emergency protocols were swiftly enacted. The disappearance of a military-chartered aircraft, especially one carrying over 100 souls, was a critical incident. The U.S. military, along with local aviation authorities, began coordinating an immediate response. Search and rescue operations were mobilized, with aircraft and ships directed to the last known location of Flight 739. As the news of the disappearance began to spread, the families of those on board, the military community, and the aviation world held their breath, hoping for any news of the aircraft. The mystery of what happened to Flight 739 in those final moments before it vanished would soon captivate the world, sparking questions, theories, and a massive search effort that sought in vain to uncover traces of the missing plane. The disappearance of Flight 739 triggered one of the largest search and rescue operations of the time, as the U.S. military, alongside international and local forces, launched an extensive effort to locate the missing aircraft and its passengers. Given the flight's last known position over the expansive Pacific Ocean, the area to be searched was vast and daunting, presenting significant logistical challenges. As soon as the aircraft was reported missing, the control centers coordinating the search mobilized a fleet of aircraft from various bases across the Pacific Rim. These included long-range patrol aircraft equipped with sophisticated radar and other sensory equipment designed for maritime surveillance and search operations. The U.S. Navy dispatched ships that were in the region to converge on the suspected area where contact with Flight 739 was lost. This initial response was a race against time, with hope still alive for finding survivors. Simultaneously, the Air Force's Rescue Coordination Center set up a command hub to oversee the operation, pulling in resources from across the military spectrum. This hub became the focal point for all communication and decision-making, ensuring that efforts were not duplicated and resources were deployed efficiently. Information flowed continuously, with updates on weather conditions, sea currents, and any sightings or debris reported by ships and planes partaking in the search. The search area, primarily defined by the last known radar contact with Flight 739, covered thousands of square miles of ocean. The area was known for its deep waters and challenging weather conditions, which could change swiftly and dramatically, complicating search efforts. The operation used a grid pattern, with each ship and aircraft assigned specific sectors to scour. The systematic approach was designed to cover as much area as possible, but the vastness of the Pacific Ocean and its deceptive tranquility made the task daunting. As days passed, the intensity of the search increased, but no trace of the aircraft or its passengers was found. The lack of debris or any sign of the aircraft was perplexing, leading to growing frustration and anxiety among the search teams and the families waiting for news. The operation continued round the clock, with search teams working in shifts, battling fatigue, and the emotional toll of the fruitless search. Meanwhile, speculation about the fate of Flight 739 began to mount. The absence of a distress signal prior to the disappearance raised questions about sudden catastrophic events, such as an explosion or a rapid descent into the ocean, which might have left little trace. The possibility of a hijacking or a deliberate diversion was considered but seemed less likely without any communication or ransom demands. Experts from various fields were brought in to analyze the flight's last known parameters and environmental data to model potential crash scenarios. These models were used to adjust search patterns, taking into account ocean currents and wind conditions that might have moved debris away from the initial impact site. Satellite imagery was scrutinized for any anomalies that could indicate a crash site, and other nations with satellite capabilities were requested to review their data. As the search extended into weeks, the hope of finding survivors waned, and the mission gradually shifted from rescue to recovery. The focus became finding any wreckage that could provide clues to what happened during the final moments of Flight 739. This was crucial not only for solving the mystery, but also for providing closure to the families and ensuring that any potential safety issues affecting other flights could be addressed. Despite the extensive efforts, the search was eventually scaled back. The decision was heart-wrenching for all involved, particularly for the families of those on board. Memorials were held in various locations, attended by military personnel, family members, and representatives from the Flying Tiger line. The gatherings were somber, with attendees clinging to each other for support, sharing memories of their loved ones, and grappling with the unresolved fate of Flight 739. The official end of the search marked a painful closure of this chapter, leaving a lingering mystery in the annals of aviation history. The disappearance of Flight 739 remained a topic of fascination and speculation, inspiring investigative reports, documentaries, and continued amateur sleuthing. The lack of concrete evidence or wreckage allowed for numerous theories to flourish, from alien abductions to secret military experiments, each adding layers to the enigma of the vanished aircraft. Yet, the most significant impact was undoubtedly on the families and the aviation community, who continued to feel the absence of closure and the haunting presence of those 107 souls lost somewhere over the vast, inscrutable Pacific Ocean. The vanishing of Flying Tiger Line Flight 739 in 1962 continued to haunt the aviation community and the families of the missing. Without any wreckage or clues to provide closure, the mystery seemed destined to remain unsolved. But behind the scenes, various theories were actively being explored, each proposing a different scenario that might explain the sudden disappearance. One prevailing theory was a catastrophic mechanical failure. The Lockheed L-1049 Super Constellation was a reliable aircraft, but it was not immune to the intense demands of long-haul flights across vast oceanic expanses. Experts pondered the possibility of a structural failure that could have led to an in-flight breakup. This type of disaster could explain the lack of distress signals if the aircraft was destroyed rapidly and completely above deep waters. Another theory suggested sabotage or an explosion. Given the Cold War context and the military nature of the flight, speculations arose about the involvement of espionage or a targeted attack. Some relatives of the crew and passengers theorized that the plane might have been brought down by a bomb, perhaps planted to intercept the sensitive military cargo purportedly on board. This theory was bolstered by scattered reports from sailors who claimed to have seen a bright light in the sky that could have been an explosion. However, these accounts were never officially confirmed, and no physical evidence supported the explosion theory. Further complicating the mystery were the extensive military communications and radar networks spanning the Pacific, which astonishingly failed to track the aircraft beyond its last known position. The lack of radar evidence puzzled investigators and fueled conspiracy theories. Some suggested that the flight might have veered off course, entering an area where it was either captured or brought down by foreign military forces. Yet, without traces or credible reports from international or enemy states, this scenario remained speculative. As time passed, the intense focus of the initial search efforts waned, but the determination for answers did not. The military's initial response had been robust, reflecting the urgency and gravity of losing a plane carrying over 100 service members and civilians. When the official search operations were concluded, many felt a profound sense of incompleteness, driving them to continue seeking answers independently. This ongoing quest for clarity led to a resurgence of interest in the case among amateur sleuths and investigative journalists. Decades after the disappearance, new technologies and changing geopolitical landscapes allowed for fresh examinations of old flight data and military records. Freedom of Information Act requests revealed previously classified documents that shed some light on the military's internal responses and concerns regarding the flight's disappearance. The families of the passengers, united in their need for closure and understanding, formed a network to share information and support each other. Annual gatherings and memorials were organized, where stories about the missing were shared, keeping their memories alive. These meetings often served as a forum for exchanging the latest findings and theories, maintaining pressure on the authorities to keep the investigation open. In recent years, advances in underwater technology and satellite imagery have prompted new searches in the Pacific. These efforts are often funded by private entities and supported by volunteers, including retired naval officers and aviation experts. Each new search brought a flurry of media attention, rekindling public interest and, more importantly, offering a glimmer of hope to those still haunted by the loss. Documentary filmmakers and investigative reporters have also played a crucial role in keeping the story in the public eye. Documentaries have delved deep into the technical aspects of the aircraft's design and operation, interviewed former military personnel who were involved in the initial search and rescue operations, and highlighted the personal stories of those left behind. These films often end with a call to action, urging aviation authorities and the military to revisit the case with new tools and insights. The continuing mystery of Flight 739 not only serves as a poignant reminder of the risks inherent in aviation, but also underscores the limitations of mid-20th century technology in dealing with such disappearances. The story of Flight 739, woven through decades of speculation, research, and remembrance, remains a compelling chapter in the history of aviation, reflecting the enduring human need for answers and the relentless pursuit of truth, no matter how elusive it may be. The lack of definitive answers surrounding the disappearance of Flying Tiger Line Flight 739 had a profound impact on the families of the passengers and the crew, as well as on military operations and the broader aviation industry. As years turned into decades without closure, the emotional weight bore heavily on those left behind, prompting shifts in policy and continuing dialogue about aviation safety and military procedures. The immediate aftermath of the disappearance was a time of intense grief and confusion for the families of the 107 individuals on board. The absence of tangible evidence or a clear explanation compounded their sorrow, leaving many to grapple with unresolved feelings of loss. This grief was accompanied by a growing frustration with the military and government agencies, perceived by some as withholding information or not doing enough to resolve the mystery. This sentiment spurred some family members to become advocates for change in how military-related aviation incidents were handled, particularly regarding transparency and communication with victims' families. Their efforts led to more structured policies on providing timely and clear information to families, which has since been adopted in other areas of military and civilian aviation. In addition to the emotional and procedural impacts, the disappearance prompted a re-evaluation of flight safety protocols and emergency response strategies. The military, heavily reliant on chartered flights for transporting personnel and equipment, particularly during the Vietnam War, began to implement more rigorous checks on aircraft and operators, including stricter standards for maintenance and crew training. This shift was mirrored in the civilian aviation sector, where the incident underscored the need for robust tracking and communication technologies. It catalyzed advancements in flight monitoring systems, including the development and eventual mandate of more sophisticated transponders and satellite-based tracking systems that could maintain contact with aircraft over vast and remote areas like the Pacific Ocean. The ongoing mystery also influenced public perceptions and policies regarding military secrecy and accountability. The initial secrecy surrounding the flight's mission and cargo fueled conspiracy theories and public speculation, leading to calls for greater transparency in military operations involving civilian contractors and equipment. As the decades passed, the families of those lost on Flight 739 found various ways to honor their memories. Memorials were established, and annual remembrances were organized, allowing relatives, friends, and former military colleagues to gather and share memories of their loved ones. These events also served as platforms for continuing advocacy for improvements in aviation safety and military accountability. The unresolved nature of the disappearance continued to inspire investigative journalists, researchers, and filmmakers, leading to periodic resurgences of interest in the case. Each new article, documentary, or book prompted public discussions and occasionally brought forward new information or theories, though none sufficient to solve the mystery. Most recently, technological advances in underwater exploration and satellite imaging have given new hope to those seeking answers. These technologies have the potential to explore and map the ocean floor at depths and with accuracy previously unattainable. Inspired by successful searches for other lost aircraft, such as Air France Flight 447, some family members and independent researchers have called for new searches in the areas where Flight 739 might have gone down. Despite the tragedy and the many years that have passed, the legacy of Flying Tiger Line Flight 739 remains a powerful catalyst for change and a poignant reminder of the enduring human spirit's quest for answers and justice. The story of Flight 739 continues to resonate, a mysterious chapter in aviation history that still captures the imagination and determination of many around the world. As the years turned into decades, the unresolved mystery of Flying Tiger Line Flight 739 continued to cast a long shadow over all who were touched by its disappearance. With neither wreckage nor definitive answers, the enigma remained a persistent reminder of the limitations faced in the search for truth within the vast, unyielding expanses of the ocean. The story of Flight 739, fraught with its enduring mystery, has transcended its era to become a symbol of unresolved loss and the pursuit of closure. Families of the missing, united by their shared grief, formed a close-knit community, bound together by the need to keep the memory of their loved ones alive and to seek answers. This community often gathered on anniversaries of the disappearance, creating a space not only to mourn, but also to share updates and continue pressing for action. Despite the passage of time, the call for new searches never completely died down. Advances in technology, particularly in satellite imaging and deep-sea exploration, rekindled hope among the families and the aviation community that someday the site of the crash might be discovered. Inspired by successful recoveries of other lost aircraft, such as the finding of the Titanic and the wreckage of Air France Flight 447 decades after their disappearances, advocates for reopening the case of Flight 739 argued that modern technology could finally offer the means to locate the remains of the aircraft. Efforts to leverage new technologies led to proposals for targeted searches using sophisticated sonar equipment capable of deep-sea mapping, as well as drones that could scan large areas of the ocean floor more efficiently than manned vessels. These proposals garnered attention not only from the families, but also from governmental and private entities that could provide the necessary resources. In the realm of public engagement and media, the story of Flight 739 maintained a captivating allure. Documentaries produced in recent years brought the case back into the public eye, featuring interviews with former military personnel, aviation experts, and family members. These documentaries often explored not just the facts of the case, but also the broader implications of such disappearances on aviation safety and military transparency. Additionally, the mystery inspired authors and filmmakers, leading to the creation of various fictional accounts and conspiracy theories that, while often speculative, kept the conversation alive. These narratives explored themes of Cold War espionage, alien encounters, and even experimental military technology, reflecting the human fascination with unresolved mysteries. Academically, the disappearance of Flight 739 became a case study in international relations and military studies programs, where it was examined in the context of U.S. military logistics during the Vietnam War era and the geopolitical tensions of the time. This scholarly interest helped to maintain a degree of academic attention on the case, ensuring that it remained a part of the discourse on aviation history and military operations. Legal and political advocacy also became a significant part of the legacy of Flight 739. Family members and their supporters often lobbied for changes in laws regarding the military's accountability to civilian families and the transparency of information concerning accidents involving military personnel and equipment. These efforts sometimes led to legislative changes and improved policies regarding family briefings and access to records. As the 60th anniversary of the disappearance approached, the U.S. government released several formally classified documents related to the flight. While much of the information had been redacted, the release of these documents represented a small victory for those who had long advocated for greater transparency. For some families, the documents provided new details that, while not solving the mystery, offered insights into the military's handling of the incident. The ongoing quest for answers about Flight 739 also highlighted broader issues related to the recognition of service personnel and civilians involved in covert or classified operations. This led to discussions about the ways in which such individuals are memorialized and honored, culminating in more inclusive memorials that acknowledge their contributions and sacrifices. Today, the legacy of Flying Tiger Line Flight 739 is multifaceted. It is remembered as a poignant story of loss and the relentless pursuit of truth, a narrative that has impacted aviation safety regulations, military accountability, and the technologies used in search and rescue operations. For the families of those who vanished along with the aircraft, it remains a deeply personal story of waiting and hoping for closure. In a broader sense, the mystery serves as a reminder of the vulnerabilities in human endeavors, particularly in the face of vast and indifferent natural forces like the deep ocean. Yet, it also illustrates the human capacity for resilience, the enduring quest for knowledge, and the unyielding desire to find answers, no matter how elusive they may be. The profound impact of Flying Tiger Line Flight 739's disappearance stretched beyond the immediate shock and continued to resonate through the subsequent years, driving changes and fostering developments across multiple facets of society, from aviation technology to family advocacy and public policy. As the narrative of Flight 739 moved forward, it beckoned a broader contemplation on the themes of memory, technological progress, and the pursuit of closure. A pursuit that never seemed to diminish in intensity or necessity. Even decades after the disappearance, the commitment to finding Flight 739 was reinvigorated by technological advancements that offered new hope. The introduction of autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, and more sophisticated side-scan sonar technology provided tools capable of exploring the ocean depths with unprecedented detail and efficiency. Proposals for new search initiatives were drafted, with input from oceanographers, former naval officers, and aviation experts who believed that the aircraft's final resting place could be pinpointed with the right resources and a targeted approach. Family members and advocacy groups, empowered by these technological promises, renewed their calls for action. They organized conferences and engaged with experts in maritime search and recovery to outline feasible search plans. These plans were then presented to governmental and private agencies capable of funding and executing such ambitious undertakings. The dialogue between these families and potential supporters became a testament to the enduring hope that modern technology could finally unravel the mystery that time had not forgotten. The story of Flight 739 also found its way into educational curriculums and cultural reflections, influencing how future generations understood and interacted with the past's unresolved mysteries. Universities and educational institutions developed courses that dealt not only with the technical aspects of aviation, but also with crisis management, historical analysis, and the psychological impact of unresolved tragedies. These academic discussions often used Flight 739 as a case study to explore the complex interplay between technology, human factors, and nature. Culturally, the disappearance influenced artistic expressions across mediums. Playwrights, novelists, and filmmakers drew upon the emotional and mysterious elements of the story to craft works that questioned the nature of truth, the reliability of memory, and the human response to the unknown. These works contributed to a broader societal engagement with the themes of loss and resolution, illustrating how a single event can continue to inspire and provoke thought across generations. On a more practical level, the ongoing discussions around Flight 739 spurred further enhancements in aviation safety standards and search and rescue operations. The incident underscored the need for robust international cooperation in aviation incidents, leading to stronger protocols for sharing information and resources during multinational search operations. The global aviation community took to heart the lessons learned, or rather, the questions raised, by Flight 739's disappearance. Policymakers, influenced by the advocacy of families and communities connected to the flight, worked to refine laws regarding the military's responsibility to keep families informed and involved in the aftermath of accidents involving military personnel on non-combat missions. These policy changes aim to ensure transparency and accountability, preventing any future family from experiencing the same prolonged anguish of not knowing. As the years turned into a full circle of commemorations, various memorials and events were established to honor the memories of those lost on Flight 739. These acts of remembrance served as poignant reminders of the individuals behind the mystery, highlighting their lives and legacies rather than allowing them to be overshadowed by the circumstances of their disappearance. Through these memorials, the families found not only spaces of mourning, but also of celebration of the lives that had touched theirs so deeply. New memorials were dedicated, and annual gatherings were held, not just as rituals of remembrance, but as ongoing affirmations of the community's commitment to finding answers. Each ceremony, each plaque unveiled, and each story shared added layers to the collective memory of the event, ensuring that the narrative of Flight 739 would remain a living, evolving part of the historical and cultural landscape. Through these multifaceted legacies, the story of flying Tiger Line Flight 739 continues to resonate. It serves as a powerful narrative about the limits of human endeavor against nature's immensity, the relentless pursuit of technological advancement to conquer these limits, and the undying human spirit's need for resolution and understanding. Even as the mystery endures, the quest for closure remains a poignant reminder of the indelible impact of those who were lost, and the unyielding hope of those left behind to tell their story. On the evening of June 23, 1950, Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 2501 was preparing for one of its regular long-haul flights across the United States. The aircraft, a Douglas DC-4 propliner, was a workhorse of commercial aviation, known for its reliability and robustness. It was scheduled to fly from New York City to Seattle with a stopover in Minneapolis, carrying 55 passengers and a crew of 3. As the passengers boarded at LaGuardia Airport, the mood was typical of a late evening flight. Some were weary business travelers preparing for a sleep during the flight, while others were families looking forward to their vacations or homecomings. The crew, led by the experienced Captain Robert Lind, completed their pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency. Captain Lind, a veteran with an impeccable record, was well familiar with the route, having flown it numerous times. The ground crew loaded the last pieces of luggage into the cargo hold as the stewardesses made final adjustments inside the cabin, ensuring everything was secure for takeoff. The weather reports indicated clear skies in New York, but there were reports of potential thunderstorms over Lake Michigan. Such weather was not uncommon during the summer months, and the crew was prepared to handle the usual turbulence that might arise from such conditions. As the last of the evening light faded, Flight 2501 took off smoothly from LaGuardia, ascending into the night sky. The powerful engines of the DC-4 hummed as the aircraft climbed, its lights becoming just another twinkling among the stars. The flight plan took the aircraft westward, over the expansive landscapes of the United States, scheduled to cross over several states before reaching the wide expanse of Lake Michigan. As the plane settled into its cruising altitude, Captain Lind communicated with air traffic control to confirm their route and report their position. The passengers, now more relaxed, were either dozing off or quietly engaging in their own activities. Some read books under the dim cabin lights, while others chatted softly with their neighbors. Several hours into the flight, as Flight 2501 approached Lake Michigan, the weather began to change. The clear skies gave way to increasing cloudiness, and distant flashes of lightning were visible on the western horizon. Captain Lind reviewed the latest weather updates and discussed the situation with his co-pilot. They decided to request a lower altitude from air traffic control, hoping to avoid the worst of the approaching storm system. The air traffic controller at Chicago's radar center acknowledged their request and began the process to authorize a change in altitude. However, this routine communication soon took a critical turn. As Flight 2501 crossed over into Michigan airspace, the weather conditions deteriorated rapidly. The aircraft began to encounter severe turbulence as it entered the storm, with passengers instructed to fasten their seat belts and secure any loose items. Despite the growing severity of the weather, the crew of Flight 2501 maintained their professionalism. Captain Lind and his co-pilot worked diligently to navigate through the increasingly rough conditions, adjusting their instruments and preparing for a more turbulent ride. In the cabin, the stewardesses did their best to reassure passengers, their calm demeanor helping to keep everyone as comfortable as possible under the circumstances. The last radio contact with Flight 2501 occurred shortly after their request to descend to a lower altitude. Captain Lind reported their position and intentions to air traffic control, his voice calm but firm over the radio. Then, as the storm enveloped the aircraft, communication was suddenly lost. The radar blip that represented Flight 2501 on the controller's screens blinked once more, then disappeared. Back at the radar center, controllers frantically tried to re-establish contact with the aircraft. Calls went unanswered, and the screen showed no sign of Flight 2501. As minutes turned into hours without any word from the plane, the situation became increasingly dire. Search and rescue operations were initiated as the reality of the situation set in. Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 2501, with all 58 souls on board, had vanished over Lake Michigan. This disappearance would trigger one of the largest search operations in the history of American aviation, and mark the beginning of a decades-long mystery that would captivate the nation and remain unresolved to this day. The story of Flight 2501 is not just a tale of a missing airplane. It is a narrative filled with human elements, technical challenges, and the profound mystery of the unknown. As Flight 2501 progressed over Lake Michigan, the storm intensified. Captain Lind's last transmission to air traffic control had been routine, requesting a descent to a lower altitude due to the worsening weather. There was no indication of panic or trouble beyond the storm itself. Yet, within minutes of this communication, the aircraft vanished from radar screens, leaving only silence where there should have been the steady crackle of radio contact. On the ground, the sudden disappearance of Flight 2501 sent shockwaves through the air traffic control community. Controllers made repeated attempts to contact the aircraft, issuing calls that went unanswered. With each passing minute, the urgency escalated. Radar operators widened their scans, searching for any sign of the plane, but found nothing. The situation quickly escalated to a full-scale emergency. The disappearance of an aircraft is a critical incident that triggers a rapid response from multiple agencies. Within hours, the U.S. Coast Guard was mobilized, along with state and local rescue units. The initial search was chaotic, hampered by the very storm that had ensnared Flight 2501. Boats and aircraft that could navigate the turbulent waters and gusty winds were dispatched. The night was dark, the rain heavy, reducing visibility and making the search efforts increasingly difficult. As dawn broke, the storm had passed, leaving behind calmer waters and clearer skies. The search area was vast, covering a significant portion of Lake Michigan where the plane was last reported. The operation involved aircraft flying low over the water, crews scanning the surface for any sign of wreckage or survivors. Boats equipped with sonar trawled back and forth, their crews hopeful, but growing more anxious as time passed without a sign. On shore, the situation was equally tense. At the Northwest Orient Airlines headquarters, officials gathered to coordinate their response with the ongoing search efforts. Families of those on board were contacted, many converging at the airline's offices seeking information and comfort. The atmosphere was fraught with grief and tension, as airline staff tried to provide updates on the search and support for the families. The media began to cover the story extensively, with reporters stationed at airfields, Coast Guard stations, and the airline's offices. The public's interest in the story grew as the hours turned into days without any sign of Flight 2501. The lack of news added to the speculation and concern about what might have happened to the aircraft. Was it a victim of the storm, or was there another explanation for its sudden disappearance? As the search continued, debris began to surface. Small items such as seat cushions, life jackets, and minor fragments of metal were recovered from the lake. Each piece was carefully logged and examined, but none provided any significant clues that could explain the disappearance. The discovery of these items confirmed the grim reality that the aircraft had met a catastrophic end, but the main wreckage, fuselage, engines, and the majority of the structure remained elusive. The Civil Aeronautics Board, CAB, responsible for investigating civil aviation accidents, took charge of the investigation. Teams of experts were brought in to analyze the weather conditions at the time of the disappearance, the aircraft's maintenance records, and the crew's backgrounds. The investigation was exhaustive, delving into every conceivable aspect of the flight and its operation. Yet, the lack of substantial wreckage hindered the ability to draw definitive conclusions about the cause of the crash. Theories about what happened to Flight 2501 varied widely. Some experts speculated that a sudden downdraft, a common danger in thunderstorms, could have forced the plane into the lake. Others suggested structural failure due to stress from severe turbulence, without the aircraft's flight recorders, which were not mandated at the time, or significant wreckage. These theories remained speculative, each plausible, but unproven. As days turned into weeks, the official search was eventually scaled back. The reality set in that finding the aircraft might be impossible given the technology and resources available at the time. This decision was heartbreaking for the families, who had clung to hope that the search would provide answers and perhaps even miracles. In the aftermath, the impact of Flight 2501's disappearance resonated deeply. It led to changes in how weather was reported to aircraft and sparked discussions about improving safety protocols for flights over large bodies of water. It also highlighted the need for more robust search and rescue capabilities, including the eventual requirement for flight recorders, which would become known as black boxes, on commercial aircraft. The story of Flight 2501 thus became a catalyst for change in aviation safety, even as it remained one of the great unsolved mysteries of commercial aviation. The families of the lost passengers and crew continued to remember them, holding annual memorials and pressing for ongoing searches. Their loss was not forgotten, and the mystery of Flight 2501 continued to inspire both caution and curiosity in the aviation community. When the radar contact with Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 2501 was lost on that stormy night over Lake Michigan, it signaled the start of a complex, multi-agency search and rescue operation that would eventually become one of the largest in the history of the Great Lakes. Initial efforts were hampered by the same storm that Flight 2501 encountered. The turbulent weather, with gusting winds and heavy rains, made immediate search activities challenging and dangerous. As the storm cleared in the early morning hours, the U.S. Coast Guard, along with several local maritime agencies, launched their vessels into the still choppy waters of Lake Michigan. Helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft from the Coast Guard and Michigan State Police were dispatched at first light. Pilots navigated above the vast water body, scanning for any signs of the missing aircraft. Their eyes searched for oil slicks, debris, or anything that could be linked to Flight 2501. Meanwhile, boats equipped with sonar systems crisscrossed the estimated crash area, hoping to detect underwater wreckage. On shore, the situation was becoming a focal point for national media attention. Reporters flocked to the Coast Guard stations and the Northwest Orient Airlines offices, where impromptu press centers had been set up. Family members of those on board the ill-fated flight gathered too, their faces etched with worry and grief, holding on to each other and waiting for any news. The airline's executives, faced with the enormity of the situation, coordinated closely with the search teams and federal aviation officials. They provided detailed information about the aircraft and its passengers, hoping it might aid the search efforts. Northwest Orient Airlines also set up support services for the families, offering counseling and regular updates about the search operation. As the search entered its second and third days, the scope expanded. The U.S. Navy joined the operation, bringing in additional ships and aircraft equipped with more advanced search technology. These military assets were used to cover larger areas of the lake more quickly than the smaller Coast Guard vessels and civilian boats could manage. Despite these extensive efforts, the search teams found frustratingly little. Small pieces of debris began to surface, items that were confirmed to be from Flight 2501, bits of upholstery, shards of window glass, and personal effects floating among the waves. Each discovery was meticulously catalogued and analyzed, providing grim evidence of the plane's disintegration, but little information on the cause. By the end of the first week, the lack of significant wreckage intensified the mystery. Divers were called in to explore areas where sonar hits suggested there could be larger pieces of debris on the lakebed. These dives were difficult and risky, given the depth and the unpredictable currents of Lake Michigan. The divers worked in challenging conditions, sometimes battling poor visibility and strong underwater currents that made each dive a potentially perilous endeavor. Parallel to the physical search, investigators from the Civil Aeronautics Board, CAB, began their inquiry into the disappearance. They examined meteorological data from the night of the flight, looking for clues in the storm patterns that might explain what happened. Interviews with other pilots flying similar routes that night provided additional context on the weather conditions and how they might have affected Flight 2501. The investigators also delved into maintenance records and the operational history of the DC-4 aircraft. They explored every possible angle, from mechanical failure and pilot error to structural deficiencies and potential overloading. Each hypothesis was systematically tested against the known facts of the flight's last hours, but without the main wreckage or flight recorders, conclusive answers were elusive. As weeks turned into months, the intensity of the search diminished. The daily briefings to the press and families became less frequent, and the flotilla of search vessels thinned out. Yet, for the families of those aboard Flight 2501, the need for closure never waned. They continued to push for continued efforts, holding on to hope that the lake might yet yield its secrets. The CAB eventually released a report that was inconclusive in determining the exact cause of the crash. It cited the severe weather and the possibility of structural failure induced by stress from the storm, but noted the lack of physical evidence made it impossible to pinpoint a definitive cause. The report did, however, lead to recommendations for improving storm tracking and weather reporting to aircraft, hoping to prevent similar tragedies in the future. Decades later, the disappearance of Flight 2501 remains a poignant chapter in the annals of aviation history. It stands as a reminder of nature's power and the limits of human technology, a story that continues to evoke both sorrow and fascination. For the families of the lost, the lakeshore became a place of pilgrimage, a site to gather, remember, and perhaps one day find peace. The ongoing mystery surrounding the disappearance of Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 2501 had by now stirred considerable public and professional interest. Various theories about what had led to the aircraft's sudden loss began to circulate, each contributing its part to the complex tapestry of speculation. These ranged from mechanical failure and catastrophic weather events to more sinister possibilities such as sabotage. In the realm of formal investigation, the Civil Aeronautics Board, CAB, led the charge, poring over every piece of evidence, from weather reports to the aircraft's maintenance history. They sought to understand how a well-maintained, reliable aircraft like the DC-4 could simply vanish without a trace. Mechanics and engineers scrutinized the plane's service records, confirming that all routine checks and balances had been performed before the flight. Meanwhile, meteorologists provided in-depth analyses of the storm that Flight 2501 had encountered, noting that while severe, such weather conditions were not typically beyond the capability of the aircraft to withstand. Parallel to these professional inquiries, amateur sleuths and conspiracy theorists also took a keen interest in the disappearance. Some suggested that the aircraft might have been brought down by a bomb, theorizing that the lack of debris was consistent with a mid-air explosion that could have dispersed wreckage over a wider area, thus eluding search efforts. Others speculated about a possible collision with another aircraft, perhaps military, which was not reported due to the secretive nature of Cold War operations. Amid these swirling theories, one of the more grounded speculations involved a sudden structural failure caused by stress from the storm. Aviation experts pointed out that while the DC-4 was robust, unexpected weaknesses could emerge under extreme conditions. The possibility that the aircraft had suffered a critical failure at a high altitude could explain the minimal debris and the lack of a distress signal if the breakup had been swift and total. As the investigation continued without definitive conclusions, the families of the passengers and crew found themselves in a painful limbo. The lack of closure weighed heavily, their grief compounded by the swirling uncertainty and speculation. They rallied for continued investigation, pressing for new searches and reaching out to anyone who might shed light on the fate of their loved ones. In response to these family advocacies, annual memorials were organized, both as a way to honor those lost and to keep the public's attention on the unresolved case. These events often featured moments of poignant remembrance alongside calls for action, with speeches that melded personal loss with broader appeals for aviation safety improvements. The emotional toll of the tragedy and the ongoing mystery also reverberated through the broader aviation community. Airlines and regulatory bodies, spurred by the tragic loss of Flight 2501, began to reconsider and revise their safety protocols. This led to increased investments in weather tracking technologies and improvements in aircraft design, especially concerning structural integrity and storm resistance. These changes reflected a growing acknowledgement within the industry that safety must evolve with the increasing complexity of air travel. The lessons drawn from the Flight 2501 tragedy and similar incidents began to shape a new era of aviation safety protocols, focusing on preventing recurrence by understanding the failures of the past. Meanwhile, as technology advanced, new efforts were made to locate the wreckage of Flight 2501. Innovations in sonar and underwater exploration offered hope that the main crash site might finally be discovered. These modern searches, often led by volunteer groups or funded by grants, were driven by a blend of historical interest and a commitment to providing answers to the families who had waited for decades. Each new search brought a flurry of media attention, rekindling public and professional interest in the case. Documentaries and news specials delved into the story, interviewing aging relatives of the passengers, retired investigators, and experts in aviation archaeology. These programs often concluded with a note of hope that somewhere beneath the waters of Lake Michigan, the answers to the mystery of Flight 2501 waited to be discovered. Through these continued efforts, the story of Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 2501 remained alive, a somber reminder of nature's unpredictability and the relentless pursuit of closure in the face of unfathomable loss. Each chapter in the ongoing saga added layers to the legacy of the flight, intertwining threads of technological progress, human resilience, and the enduring quest for understanding. The ongoing quest to understand the disappearance of Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 2501 had significant repercussions across the aviation industry, highlighting critical areas for improvement in both technology and regulatory practices. The tragedy, unresolved and haunting as it was, catalyzed a series of changes designed to enhance the safety and reliability of air travel. In the wake of the disappearance, there was a concerted effort to improve weather forecasting and its integration into pilot briefings. The severe storm that Flight 2501 encountered was known to air traffic controllers and the Meteorological Service. Yet the existing protocols for communicating such critical information to aircraft were deemed insufficient. This led to more stringent requirements for real-time weather updates and mandatory weather briefings for flights traversing known problematic routes. Simultaneously, this incident underscored the vulnerability of aircraft to severe weather conditions and prompted research into better structural designs and materials that could withstand extreme turbulence. Aircraft manufacturers began collaborating more closely with meteorologists to understand how aircraft could be designed or modified to survive unexpected severe weather encounters. Moreover, the lack of debris and difficulty in locating the wreckage highlighted the limitations in search and rescue operations at the time. This realization pushed for advancements in emergency location technology. The push for equipping aircraft with more reliable emergency locator transmitters (ELTs) gained momentum. These devices, designed to emit signals in the event of a crash, were made more robust and effective, ensuring they could withstand impacts and operate under a broader range of conditions. The tragedy also played a pivotal role in the eventual development and mandatory installation of flight data recorders, FDRs, and cockpit voice recorders, CVRs, known colloquially as black boxes. While these were not new concepts in 1950, the Flight 2501 disaster underscored their potential value in solving aviation mysteries. By the late 1950s and early 1960s, regulations began to change, gradually making these devices standard equipment on commercial aircraft, providing investigators with crucial data in the aftermath of accidents. Aside from technological and procedural enhancements, the Flight 2501 incident had a profound impact on regulatory practices. It prompted a re-evaluation of how flight over large bodies of water was managed, leading to more rigorous safety protocols. New regulations were put in place requiring more comprehensive life-saving equipment on board and rigorous survival training for flight crews. For the families of the passengers and crew lost with Flight 2501, these changes were a bittersweet outcome. While they might not bring back their loved ones, these improvements in aviation safety provided a legacy of increased security for future air travelers. Their advocacy had not only kept the memory of the flight alive, but also ensured that the lessons gleaned from this tragedy would lead to tangible enhancements in flight safety. Memorials were erected in honor of those lost, serving as poignant reminders of the personal cost of aviation accidents. These memorials became sites of reflection, not only for the grieving families, but also for the communities and professionals within the aviation industry, reminding everyone of the ever-present need for vigilance and improvement. As technology continued to evolve, so did the efforts to locate Flight 2501's wreckage. Periodic expeditions were launched, fueled by advancements in underwater technology and driven by a mix of historical interest, technical challenge, and a deep-seated desire for closure. Each expedition brought hope that the aircraft might finally be found, providing answers to the lingering questions that had persisted for decades. Documentaries and news articles periodically revisited the story, each iteration renewing public interest and understanding of the impact such tragedies have on technology, regulation, and human lives. Through these stories, the legacy of Flight 2501 lived on, a narrative interwoven with lessons of resilience, the advancement of science, and the unyielding human spirit seeking answers in the face of adversity. Each retelling served to honor those lost and to celebrate the progress made in their memory, ensuring that their legacy would continue to influence safer skies for future generations. As decades passed since the disappearance of Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 2501, the unresolved mystery continued to captivate the imagination of many, serving as a poignant reminder of the uncertainties inherent in early commercial aviation and the ongoing quest for safety improvements. The legacy of the flight persisted, influencing not just regulatory practices and technological advancements, but also shaping cultural narratives and inspiring continued exploration. The collective memory of the incident was kept alive through a combination of public memorials, family advocacy, and periodic media attention. Each year, families of the passengers and crew gathered at memorials erected near the shores of Lake Michigan. These ceremonies were somber yet meaningful occasions, where personal stories were shared, candles were lit, and flowers were laid in remembrance of those lost. The gathering served as a testament to the enduring impact of the tragedy on the community and provided a support network for the families affected by the disaster. These memorials also attracted historians, safety experts, and aviation enthusiasts, each drawn by the story's historical significance and the lessons it offered. The narrative of Flight 2501 became a case study in the evolution of flight safety, discussed in academic papers and featured at conferences focused on aviation history and technology. Through these forums, the incident was analyzed and reanalyzed, highlighting how each piece of the story contributed to a broader understanding of the risks and necessary precautions in air travel. Meanwhile, technological advancements in sonar and underwater exploration technology spurred new interest in locating the wreckage of Flight 2501. Every few years, renewed efforts were made to search the depths of Lake Michigan, driven by both improvements in technology and a hopeful desire to provide closure to the families. These searches were often collaborative efforts involving local historical societies, volunteer groups, and occasionally government agencies. The search teams used advanced side-scan sonar equipment capable of creating detailed images of the lakebed, a far cry from the technology available at the time of the disappearance. Documentaries and investigative reports played a significant role in maintaining public interest in the flight. Filmmakers and journalists delved into the archives, interviewing surviving family members, former investigators, and aviation experts. They pieced together the story with a mix of historical footage, dramatic reconstructions, and expert analyses, presenting the tale to new audiences and ensuring that the lessons learned from the tragedy continued to resonate. The narrative of Flight 2501 also found its way into popular culture, inspiring episodes of television shows, novels, and even theatrical productions. These portrayals varied from highly factual retellings to more speculative interpretations, exploring themes of fate, tragedy, and the human spirit's resilience. Through these stories, the broader public engaged with the mystery and the profound impact it had on the lives of those involved. In the realm of policy and regulation, the influence of Flight 2501 was significant. The incident had been a catalyst for change, pushing the aviation industry to adopt stricter safety protocols and better emergency response strategies. These changes were continually updated as new technologies and methodologies emerged, part of the industry's ongoing commitment to learning from past tragedies. The introduction of global positioning systems, GPS, and automatic dependent surveillance broadcast, ADS-B, technologies in aviation marked significant milestones in the industry's evolution. These systems provided real-time tracking of aircraft anywhere in the world, a far leap from the radar and communication technologies of 1950. Flight 2501 had underscored the critical need for such advancements, and as these systems became standard, they significantly enhanced the safety and management of flight operations. The continued interest in Flight 2501 also encouraged regulatory bodies to maintain rigorous oversight of aircraft maintenance and crew training programs. The aviation industry's growth was tempered with caution, with each new technological advancement or operational procedure tested against the backdrop of incidents like Flight 2501. The tragedy became a yardstick by which safety measures were evaluated and improved. Educational institutions used the story of Flight 2501 to teach new generations of aviation professionals about the importance of safety protocols, crisis management, and ethical considerations in aviation. Universities and training academies incorporated the case into their curricula, using it as a foundation for discussions on everything from engineering solutions to psychological preparedness for emergencies. As technology continued to advance, the possibility of one day locating Flight 2501 remained an achievable goal. The development of autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, and remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, equipped with high-definition cameras offered promising new tools in the search for submerged wreckage. These technologies, coupled with more sophisticated data analysis techniques, provided hope that the lake might yet yield its secrets. Meanwhile, the families and communities connected to the tragedy remained engaged, their resolve undiminished by the passage of time. They continued to advocate for ongoing searches, support technological advancements, and participate in public discussions about aviation safety. Their involvement ensured that the memory of those lost on Flight 2501 was honored not just as a past event, but as a continuing influence on the present and future of aviation. In conclusion, the story of Northwest Orient Airlines, Flight 2501, is a profound narrative about loss, discovery, and the unending quest for answers. It serves as a reminder of the vulnerabilities once faced in air travel and the strides taken to overcome them. The legacy of Flight 2501 endures, woven into the fabric of aviation history and continuing to inspire efforts that aim to make air travel safer for all. On January 30th, 1979, Narita International Airport bustled with the usual clamor of international travel as Varig Brazilian Airlines prepared its Boeing 707 cargo aircraft for a long-haul flight to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, with a planned stopover in Los Angeles, USA. This particular flight, Varig Flight 967, was not just any routine cargo operation. It was transporting a collection of valuable paintings by the renowned Japanese-Brazilian artist Manabu Mabe, making the flight notable for both its cultural and logistic responsibilities. The Boeing 707, a workhorse of the skies, was well regarded for its robust performance and reliability in long-distance cargo transport. Varig, Brazil's leading international airline at the time, had a sterling safety record and was experienced in managing high-value cargo, ensuring that all protocols for the security and safe handling of the artworks were meticulously followed. The crew, led by an experienced captain, was well versed in the nuances of trans-Pacific flights, adding an extra layer of confidence to the operation. Preparations for the flight began early in the afternoon, with ground staff overseeing the careful loading of the cargo. Each of Mabe's paintings was securely crated and inspected before being loaded into the aircraft's hold, a process observed by both security personnel and insurance representatives, given the considerable value of the artworks. The importance of the cargo added a palpable sense of urgency and precision to the loading process. As the winter sun began to set, casting long shadows over the tarmac, the crew made their final checks. The flight plan was reviewed, weather forecasts checked, and communications equipment tested. Each member of the six-person crew carried out their responsibilities with the professionalism born of routine and the seriousness demanded by the nature of their cargo. With the cargo secured and all pre-flight checks complete, the Boeing 707 taxied to the runway. The engines roared to life, a deep, steady hum that spoke of power and readiness. At the control tower, the final clearance was given, and with a smooth surge of acceleration, Flight 967 took off, climbing steadily into the dusky sky. The aircraft's lights blinked steadily, a reassuring sign as it headed towards the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The initial phase of the flight proceeded without incident. The aircraft established contact with air traffic control, reporting its position and altitude as it made its way towards the United States. The crew settled into the rhythm of the flight, monitoring systems and navigating the plane along the well-traveled air routes across the Pacific. As Flight 967 approached the halfway point of its journey, the crew performed another routine check of the aircraft's systems. Everything appeared to be functioning as expected, with the aircraft on course and maintaining a steady altitude. The weather, which had been a concern for flights across the Pacific during the winter months, posed no issues, with clear skies reported ahead. However, just as the crew was preparing for the long mid-flight stretch, the routine nature of their journey took a dramatic and mysterious turn. After a final routine communication with Tokyo Air Traffic Control, in which the captain confirmed their position and expected route, the aircraft suddenly ceased all communications. This abrupt silence was out of character for such an experienced crew, and immediately raised concerns. At the Air Traffic Control Center, controllers attempted to re-establish contact, repeating calls to Flight 967. But there was no response, only the static hiss of an open but unresponsive channel. As minutes turned into hours without any word from the aircraft, the situation escalated rapidly from concern to emergency. The disappearance of Flight 967 initiated a flurry of activity on the ground. Varig's Operations Center, in coordination with international aviation authorities, began piecing together the aircraft's last known movements. Search and rescue operations were considered as the airline communicated with maritime and aviation assets in the region to be on the lookout for the missing aircraft. This initial response set the stage for what would become an extensive and perplexing search effort, spanning multiple countries and vast expanses of ocean. As the reality of the situation set in, the mysterious disappearance of Flight 967 with its invaluable cargo of artwork became a pressing enigma, prompting questions and theories that ranged from simple mechanical failure to more sinister possibilities of foul play. The fate of the aircraft and its crew, along with the artistic treasures it carried, had become an urgent and baffling mystery, captivating the attention of the world. The last known contact with Varig Flight 967 came as the Boeing 707 was approximately halfway over the Pacific Ocean, en route from Tokyo to Los Angeles. After routine communications with air traffic control, the aircraft, like a ghost, vanished from radar screens. The disappearance was both sudden and total, leaving no trace of the aircraft or any indication of trouble. Upon realizing the gravity of the situation, Varig and the relevant aviation authorities sprang into action. Initial hopes were that the aircraft might have diverted due to an emergency, seeking an alternate landing at one of the numerous available airstrips scattered across the Pacific Islands. However, as hours turned into days without any sign of the aircraft or distress calls, these hopes dimmed. The immediate aftermath of the disappearance saw the initiation of a large-scale search operation. Coordinated by Japanese, American, and Brazilian authorities, the search covered vast swathes of the Pacific Ocean, an area known for its deep waters and challenging weather conditions. The operation included aircraft from the U.S. Coast Guard, Japanese self-defense forces, and several commercial ships that altered their routes to aid in the search. Despite the extensive resources deployed, the search teams faced significant challenges. The Pacific Ocean's vastness and the lack of precise last-known coordinates complicated efforts. The Boeing 707 had disappeared in one of the most remote parts of the world, where radar coverage was spotty and satellite tracking of aircraft was not yet a standard practice. This lack of real-time tracking data severely hindered the search efforts, as rescue teams had to rely largely on estimated positions, which expanded the search area exponentially. Search planes flew over the ocean, scouring the waters for any sign of debris or oil slicks that might indicate a crash site. Ships equipped with sonar systems crisscrossed the estimated flight path, hoping to detect underwater wreckage. However, the depth and topography of the ocean floor made these efforts like searching for a needle in a haystack. As the search continued without success, the focus shifted to understanding what could have caused such an experienced crew flying a well-maintained aircraft to vanish without a trace. Theories abounded, ranging from catastrophic mechanical failure to more sinister scenarios involving sabotage or hijacking. The disappearance of Flight 967 was particularly puzzling due to the valuable cargo it carried, paintings by the famous artist Manabu Mabe, valued at several $1 million. This led to speculation that the disappearance might have been orchestrated to steal the artwork, although there was no concrete evidence to support such a theory. The possibility of an insurance scam was also considered, given the high value of the cargo. However, investigations into these angles did not yield any verifiable conclusions. Aviation experts also considered technical and mechanical failures as potential causes. The Boeing 707, though reliable, was susceptible to issues common to all aircraft, such as structural failure, decompression, or a catastrophic engine failure. Yet, without debris or flight data recorders, these theories remained speculative at best. Another line of inquiry focused on the pilot's actions. It was considered whether the pilot could have deliberately diverted the course, similar to other historical incidents of pilot suicide or defection. However, the background checks on the crew revealed no psychological, financial, or personal pressures that might lead to such drastic actions. As weeks turned into months, the mystery deepened. The lack of any substantial evidence, coupled with the fading trail, led to a gradual scaling down of search operations. The disappearance of Flight 967 became a cold case, leaving a void filled with unanswered questions and profound implications for aviation safety and security. The impact on the families of the crew was devastating. They had to cope with not only the loss of their loved ones, but also the torment of not knowing what had happened. The absence of closure was a heavy burden, and many family members continued to push for the continuation of the search, holding on to hope that some trace of the aircraft would be found. Meanwhile, in the broader aviation community, the disappearance led to calls for better tracking and monitoring of aircraft, especially over remote and oceanic routes. The incident highlighted the critical need for advancements in aviation technology, including the implementation of more comprehensive satellite tracking systems that could prevent another aircraft from disappearing without a trace. The mystery of Varig Flight 967 thus not only marked a tragic chapter in aviation history, but also served as a catalyst for discussions about improvements in flight safety and tracking technologies that could one day ensure that no flight ever vanishes again. As the initial shock of the disappearance of Varig Flight 967 began to settle, the aviation community and international authorities intensified their efforts in a desperate bid to locate the missing aircraft. The profound implications of a vanished Boeing 707, particularly one carrying invaluable artwork, compelled a massive, coordinated search operation involving multiple countries and sophisticated technology. The immediate aftermath of the disappearance saw an array of resources being mobilized across the Pacific. The search area, determined by the last known position of the aircraft and its projected flight path, encompassed a vast swath of ocean notorious for its depth and unpredictable weather conditions. The U.S. Coast Guard, Japanese maritime forces, and several Pacific island nations deployed aircraft and ships in a concerted effort to comb the area. Despite these robust efforts, the initial days of the search yielded no tangible results. Compounding the difficulty was the unpredictable Pacific weather, which frequently hampered search operations. High winds and rough seas often made it dangerous for ships and problematic for aircraft. The vastness of the area, combined with these challenging conditions, meant that even the most advanced technology of the time struggled to make significant progress in locating any debris or signs of the aircraft. Simultaneously, international cooperation took on new levels of urgency and complexity. Diplomatic channels were activated to ensure that all possible resources were made available. Satellite imagery analysis was enlisted, with several countries contributing their satellite capabilities to scour the ocean for any anomalies that might suggest wreckage. This period marked one of the early instances where global satellite resources were pooled in such a manner for a search and rescue operation, setting precedents for future collaborations. As days turned into weeks, the lack of results began to fuel a range of emotions from frustration to despair, particularly among the families of the crew members. The Brazilian government, facing internal pressure and the eyes of the international community, continued to urge for an extended search. They argued that the disappearance of a Brazilian aircraft and the loss of Brazilian nationals required a sustained effort, despite the growing costs and logistical challenges. The search operation also had to contend with numerous false leads and reports. Several times, satellite images or aerial reconnaissance missions thought they had spotted potential wreckage, leading to rapid reallocation of resources to these locations, only to find them unfruitive. Each false alarm tested the resolve of the search teams and added to the emotional roller coaster experienced by the families and the general public following the saga. During this intensive search phase, experts from various fields, including oceanography and aeronautical engineering, were consulted to refine the search parameters. Drift analysis based on ocean currents was conducted to predict where debris might have moved from the assumed crash site. This scientific approach helped to narrow the search areas, focusing efforts on more promising regions and improving the efficiency of the operations. Despite these sophisticated methods and the tireless efforts of all involved, the search had to confront the inevitable limitations imposed by the nature of the search area and the available technology. Deep-sea searches were particularly hampered by the ocean's depth and the seabed's complexity in the presumed crash area, which included underwater mountains and valleys that could easily hide aircraft wreckage. As weeks turned into months with no significant findings, the initial unified resolve began to wane. The daunting reality of the task, combined with the high costs and logistical difficulties, led to discussions about scaling down the search efforts. International partners expressed concerns about the feasibility of continuing such an extensive search indefinitely, especially in the absence of any promising clues. This phase of the search operation culminated in a critical meeting involving representatives from all participating nations and agencies. The decision was made to transition from an active search to a more passive phase, where resources would be directed only towards specific leads, rather than broad sweeps of the ocean. This decision was met with a mix of understanding and resignation, acknowledging both the enormity of the task and the slim chances of success in finding Flight 967 after so much time had passed without a trace. The conclusion of this phase did not mean the end of efforts to find Varig Flight 967, but it marked a somber acknowledgement of the limitations faced by even the most determined and resourceful search operations. The mystery of Flight 967 would continue to linger, a haunting reminder of the uncertainties that still pervade even the most routine of human endeavors like commercial flight. The disappearance of Varig Flight 967 opened numerous investigative channels, as authorities worked tirelessly to unravel the mystery behind the vanished Boeing 707. The focus was divided between mechanical and structural theories, potential human factors, and even the more sinister possibilities of foul play, given the valuable cargo of artwork on board. Criminal investigations were initiated alongside technical inquiries to explore all conceivable angles that could explain the aircraft's sudden and complete disappearance. The Brazilian, Japanese, and American authorities coordinated their efforts, examining if the disappearance could have been orchestrated for the theft of the valuable paintings by Manabu Mabe, estimated to be worth millions of dollars. This theory was particularly compelling given the nature of the cargo, leading to a detailed scrutiny of everyone involved with the flight, from the ground crew that handled the cargo to the personnel who had access to the flight plans. Simultaneously, mechanical failure remained a strong contender in the list of possibilities. Investigators pored over maintenance records and interviewed the airline's maintenance staff to check for any signs of oversight or malpractice that could have led to a catastrophic failure mid-flight. Given the Boeing 707's robust design and Varig's reputation for rigorous maintenance standards, this line of inquiry required thorough examination to ensure no stone was left unturned. The aircraft's last moments were also under intense scrutiny. Data from air traffic control and radar recordings were analyzed to reconstruct the flight's path and altitude changes. Experts considered whether a sudden structural failure could have caused the aircraft to break apart or dive uncontrollably into the ocean. The possibility of an onboard fire or explosion, which could incapacitate the crew and lead to rapid depressurization, was also explored. Alongside technical and criminal investigations, the psychological profiles of the crew were meticulously examined. Authorities delved into the personal lives of the pilot and co-pilot, searching for any indicators of distress, financial problems, or motivations that might lead one to alter the course of the flight deliberately. This aspect of the investigation sought to understand not just the mechanical workings of the aircraft, but also the human elements at play. The investigation's complexity was compounded by the international nature of the flight's route and the jurisdictions involved. Differences in investigative techniques and interagency cooperation sometimes slowed down the process, highlighting the challenges of managing an international aviation mystery. Throughout the investigative phase, theories continued to circulate and evolve. Some experts suggested that the disappearance might have been caused by a deliberate act, perhaps a hijacking gone wrong, or an insurance scam involving the artworks. Others speculated about less likely scenarios, including a spontaneous decision by the pilot to divert the course due to a perceived emergency. The lack of definitive answers led to an atmosphere rife with speculation. Media outlets around the world reported on every development, often sensationalizing the mystery without providing concrete information. This intense public scrutiny added pressure to the investigative teams, but also ensured that the disappearance of Flight 967 remained in the public eye, fostering a sustained interest in uncovering the truth. As months turned into years without conclusive evidence or wreckage, the investigations gradually scaled back. However, the mystery of Flight 967 continued to engage the professional and amateur sleuth communities alike. Online forums, documentaries, and annual conferences dissected every piece of available data, propelling the story into the realm of legendary aviation mysteries. While the official investigations provided no definitive conclusions, they significantly influenced future aviation security measures and protocols for transporting valuable cargo. The disappearance of Flight 967 became a case study in aviation safety courses around the world, teaching new generations of pilots and airline executives about the complexities and unforeseen dangers of air travel. Despite the lack of closure, the investigative efforts into the disappearance of Varig Flight 967 underscored the importance of comprehensive safety and security protocols in aviation, leaving an indelible mark on the industry and continuing to inform practices to this day. As the mystery of Varig Flight 967's disappearance continued to baffle the world, its impact resonated deeply within the aviation industry, particularly in terms of security and cargo transport. The vanished Boeing 707, carrying millions of dollars worth of artwork, prompted a significant reevaluation of cargo security protocols worldwide, leading to enhanced measures designed to protect valuable air freight and ensure the safety of those tasked with its transport. The incident underscored vulnerabilities in the system that could potentially be exploited for criminal purposes. In response, international aviation bodies, including the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, and individual national aviation authorities, began to intensify their focus on securing air cargo. New regulations were introduced, requiring more rigorous background checks for airport and airline personnel, especially those handling valuable or sensitive cargoes. The aim was to create a more robust barrier against theft, smuggling, and other illegal activities. Technological advancements were also accelerated as a direct consequence of the Flight 967 mystery. Innovations in tracking technology became a priority, with significant investments made into real-time tracking systems that could monitor aircraft even over remote areas like the open ocean. These systems were designed to prevent a repeat of situations where a plane could disappear without a trace, providing continuous updates on an aircraft's position, speed, and altitude. The implementation of these tracking systems saw the introduction of the Global Aeronautical Distress and Safety System, GADSS, which was recommended by ICAO and began to be implemented by airlines globally. GADSS was designed to ensure that aircraft could be tracked in real time anywhere in the world, making it virtually impossible for a plane to vanish without leaving a digital footprint. Furthermore, the loss of Flight 967 catalyzed improvements in how cargo was screened and loaded onto aircraft. Security measures were tightened, with enhanced scanning equipment and more stringent inspection procedures put in place at major airports around the world. These procedures not only aimed to detect potential threats like explosives or contraband, but also ensured that the documentation and handling of valuable items like artworks were thoroughly controlled and monitored. Airlines and insurance companies, recognizing the financial risks associated with transporting high-value items, started requiring additional security measures and higher assurance levels before agreeing to carry such cargoes. This often included escorts for valuable items, sealed and tamper-proof containers, and dedicated storage areas within aircraft where access was strictly controlled. The training of airline and airport staff in security procedures also saw significant enhancements. Personnel were now regularly drilled on emergency and security protocols, including scenarios involving hijacking, theft, and other security breaches. These training programs were designed to ensure that staff could respond quickly and effectively to protect passengers, crew, and cargo under a variety of adverse conditions. Despite these advances and heightened security measures, the disappearance of Flight 967 continued to haunt the aviation community. The event became a case study in many security training programs, used to illustrate potential vulnerabilities and the importance of vigilance and adherence to protocols. The lessons learned from the incident not only influenced cargo security, but also had broader implications for passenger safety and airline operations. The legacy of Varig Flight 967 is a complex tapestry of mystery, precautionary tales, and technological progression. It highlights the interconnectedness of safety, security, and operational integrity in the modern aviation landscape. While the aircraft itself was never found, the changes brought about in its wake have undoubtedly made air travel safer and more secure, ensuring that such a disappearance remains a rare and unlikely event in the future. This progression, however, came at the cost of an unresolved mystery, leaving an indelible mark on the annals of aviation history, reminding all of the perpetual need for improvement and innovation. As years passed since the disappearance of Varig Flight 967, the incident not only remained an unresolved mystery, but also continued to captivate the attention of the aviation community, researchers, and the public. The story of the missing aircraft and its valuable cargo of Manabu Mabe's paintings has been analyzed and reanalyzed, with various theories persisting or emerging over time. This ongoing interest has ensured that the case is not forgotten, and has also had a profound impact on the families of the missing crew and the airline's history. The legacy of Flight 967 is evident in how the incident has influenced ongoing discourse on aviation safety and operational transparency. Every year, new students of aviation safety study the case, using it to understand the complexities of international air travel regulations, the importance of stringent cargo security measures, and the challenges of deep-water search and rescue operations. Conferences and symposiums often feature sessions dedicated to discussing the case, focusing on what improvements have been made and what lessons can still be learned. The case of Flight 967 has also served as a critical reference point in the development of more comprehensive international cooperative frameworks for handling aviation incidents. It underscored the necessity for countries to work together seamlessly during air emergencies, which influence the protocols used today. These collaborations are crucial not only in crises, but also in regular operations, ensuring that the skies remain safe for international flights. Furthermore, the incident has left a lasting impact on the families of the crew members who were aboard Flight 967. For these families, the disappearance isn't just a historical or technical puzzle. It's a personal tragedy that has resulted in decades of uncertainty and grief. They have become advocates for improvements in how the aviation industry handles similar cases, particularly in terms of family liaison and support. Their efforts have helped to ensure that the relatives of those affected by such mysteries are treated with more consideration and given thorough, timely information. Efforts by these families and their supporters have sometimes led to renewed interest in the case, with calls for new searches or investigations when technological or methodological advancements become available. Although official searches have long since ended, the commitment of these families ensures that new leads and theories continue to surface, keeping the search for answers alive in public consciousness. In addition to impacting aviation safety and family advocacy, the mystery of Flight 967 has also permeated popular culture. It has inspired numerous articles, books, documentaries, and even fictional representations that speculate about the fate of the aircraft. These portrayals help to maintain public interest in the case and often bring forward new theories or insights, although they can also blur the lines between fact and fiction. Despite the tragedy and the myriad challenges it presented, the disappearance of Varig Flight 967 also contributed to a broader understanding of the value and impact of art in the world of aviation cargo. The loss of Manabu Mabe's artworks was felt deeply in the art community, highlighting the need for specialized handling and transport protocols for irreplaceable items. This aspect of the legacy has led to improved practices across the logistics and insurance sectors, ensuring that artworks traveling by air are better protected today. As time moves on, the legacy of Flight 967 continues to evolve. While the mystery may never be fully solved, the lessons drawn from this tragic event remain integral to the continual improvement of international aviation safety. Through continued discussion, study, and advocacy, the aviation community ensures that the story of Flight 967, its crew, and its cargo will not be forgotten, serving as a perpetual reminder of the need for vigilance, preparedness, and cooperation in the ever-expanding realm of global air travel. The cultural and artistic impact of the disappearance of Varig Flight 967 is a poignant chapter in the story, centered around the loss of 153 paintings by the acclaimed Japanese-Brazilian artist Manabu Mabe. These artworks, valued at several $million, were not merely cargo. They represented significant cultural heritage and a profound personal loss to the art community and Mabe's legacy. The vanishing of such invaluable pieces under mysterious circumstances has left a lasting mark on the art world, highlighting the vulnerabilities associated with transporting art globally. Manabu Mabe's work was known for its vibrant expressionism, a fusion of Brazilian and Japanese artistic influences that made his paintings highly sought after on the international stage. The lost artworks were being transported back to Brazil after an exhibition in Tokyo, symbolizing a cultural bridge between Asia and South America and an important career milestone for Mabe. The disappearance of these works effectively erased a significant portfolio of his career's output, impacting not just the monetary value but also the cultural and historical record of global art heritage. This loss has prompted a broader discourse within the art and logistics industries about the risks associated with transporting art. In response, there have been tightened security protocols and better risk management strategies when moving valuable artworks. Insurance companies, artists, museums, and galleries now often insist on more stringent security measures, including enhanced tracking, vetted handling, and specialized transport services that minimize the risk of loss or damage. Moreover, the mysterious circumstances surrounding the disappearance of Flight 967 have fueled creative narratives in various media. Filmmakers, novelists, and journalists have drawn upon the story, weaving narratives that blend fact with fiction, exploring themes of loss, mystery, and the immeasurable value of art. These stories question what art means to our societies and how its value extends beyond monetary worth to embody cultural and historical significance. Documentaries focusing on the disappearance have also shed light on Manabu Mabe's influence in the art world, bringing his work to audiences who might not have been aware of his contributions before the incident. These documentaries often delve into the emotional impact of the loss on the art community and Mabe's family, highlighting the personal stories intertwined with the lost artworks. They serve as a reminder of the human aspects behind the headlines, grounding the technical and investigative details of the disappearance in a narrative of personal and cultural loss. In popular culture, the story of Flight 967 and its lost cargo of artworks has taken on a mythic quality, much like the mysteries surrounding the Titanic or the Amber Room. It captivates the imagination, offering a rich tapestry for exploration in novels, films, and art exhibitions. These cultural products allow people to engage with the story on multiple levels, from thrillers that use the disappearance as a backdrop to more introspective explorations of what such a loss means to the global community. Additionally, the story of Flight 967 has had educational impacts, being used as a case study in university courses related to art history, museum studies, and logistics. It provides a real-world context to discuss the challenges and considerations of transporting art across international borders, including legal, ethical, and logistical aspects. This educational use helps prepare the next generation of curators, artists, and logistics professionals to better manage and protect cultural assets. As the years pass, the disappearance of Varig Flight 967 remains a narrative rich with unanswered questions, but also full of lessons learned and stories told. It continues to influence not only the fields of aviation and logistics, but also the arts, serving as a stark reminder of the fragility and value of cultural artifacts. This legacy ensures that despite the mystery, the significance of the event and the art lost with it will not be forgotten. There's something eerie about a plane with no passengers. A machine meant to carry hundreds of people, now sitting idle, its engines silent, its cabin empty. The Boeing 727-223 at Quatro de Fevereiro Airport in Luanda, Angola, had been sitting there for over a year. Unpaid airport fees kept it grounded. No flight attendants bustled through its aisles. No captains checked their instruments. Just dust, settling quietly over the aircraft's faded American Airlines stripes. This particular 727 had seen better days. Built in the 1970s, it once soared across the United States, carrying businessmen, families, and dreamers. But time had stripped it of its prestige. By the early 2000s, it was purchased by an American businessman named Miami-based Keith Irwin, who leased it to an Angolan airline for fuel hauling operations. Its new role? A flying gas station, refueling remote locations where fuel trucks couldn't go. But things weren't going smoothly. The aircraft sat unpaid, unwanted, and unmoving. Mechanics worked on it sporadically, hoping to get it flying again. But bureaucracy and financial troubles kept it stuck on the tarmac. It became just another forgotten plane in an airport full of them. Until one quiet evening in May 2003, when it did something no one expected. Without warning, the 727 powered up. Its once dead engines rumbled to life, sending a low vibration through the concrete beneath it. Airport workers paused, confused. There had been no flight plan filed, no clearance. No crew had officially boarded. Yet, there it was, moving. As the plane began to taxi, its lights remained off. No communication with the tower, no acknowledgement of commands. Just the deep growl of its engines as it turned toward the runway. By the time air traffic control realized what was happening, the Boeing 727 was already accelerating. Within seconds, its wheels left the ground, and the massive aircraft soared into the darkening sky. No distress calls, no transponder signals, just silence. One of the world's largest commercial jets had just vanished into thin air, and no one knew why. At least not yet. The sky was beginning to darken over Luanda, the air thick with the lingering warmth of an African evening. The hum of airport activity had started to quiet, but on the runway, something unusual was happening. The Boeing 727, long grounded and collecting dust, was moving. Its engines, once lifeless, now roared with a low, steady rumble. It wasn't scheduled for departure. No flight plan had been filed, no pilots had requested clearance. But here it was, slowly taxiing toward the runway, as if it had a mind of its own. Airport workers turned to watch. Some assumed it was a maintenance check, maybe a simple repositioning. But something felt off. The aircraft's exterior lights remained off, making it difficult to track in the growing darkness. No calls came through the radio. No one in the control tower had authorized the movement. Inside, if there was a pilot at all, they were flying blind. The 727 was a complex machine, typically requiring a 3-person flight crew to operate. A captain, a first officer, and a flight engineer. Yet, according to every log, no qualified flight crew had boarded that evening. The only 2 people suspected of being on the aircraft were Ben Charles Padilla, an American aircraft mechanic with some piloting experience, and John Mutantu, a Congolese aviation technician. Neither was licensed to fly a 727 solo, yet somehow the plane accelerated down the runway. Then, in a rush of displaced air and roaring engines, the massive jet lifted off the ground. Control tower operators scrambled to make contact. "Unidentified aircraft, please respond." Silence. "State your flight number and intentions." Nothing. The aircraft climbed westward, heading toward the Atlantic Ocean. It passed over the coastline, growing smaller and smaller, fading into the horizon. Then, it was gone. No distress calls. No emergency transponder signals. No radar track beyond a certain point. A 200,000-pound aircraft had just disappeared, and the world would never see it again. The night air over Luanda settled into a thick, humid stillness. The Boeing 727 had disappeared beyond the horizon, swallowed by the vast Atlantic. Yet inside the control tower, the confusion lingered like a fog. Officials scrambled to make sense of what had just happened. A commercial airliner had taken off with no clearance, no lights, and no communication. That alone was an aviation nightmare. But worse, no one could confirm who had been at the controls. The last known individuals connected to the aircraft were Ben Charles Padilla and John Mutantu, but neither had been scheduled to fly. Padilla was a skilled mechanic and a licensed pilot for small aircraft, but he wasn't qualified to operate a 727 alone. The aircraft required a flight crew trained in complex systems, someone with experience in a large multi-engine commercial jet. So how did it take off so smoothly? Some in the airport speculated that Padilla and Mutantu were not alone. Had a third person, perhaps a skilled pilot, been secretly involved? If so, who were they, and where had they gone? Immediately, officials in Angola reported the missing aircraft. But there was little they could do. The plane had left national airspace. Once it flew over the ocean, it became a ghost. In the following days, the U.S. government took an interest. It was 2003, and in the post-9/11 world, an unidentified commercial jet suddenly going off the grid set off alarms. The FBI, CIA, and even the National Security Agency, NSA, started monitoring possible sightings. Had the plane been hijacked? Was it being repurposed for something sinister? A Boeing 727 wasn't exactly easy to hide. It was nearly 50 meters long and weighed over 100 tons when fully fueled. Yet, as the days passed, there were no sightings. No distress signals. No reports of a crash. It was as if the plane had never existed. Authorities issued international alerts. Air traffic controllers around the world were told to be on the lookout for any unidentified Boeing 727s. Security was tightened at airports in Africa, South America, and the Middle East. But the missing aircraft never turned up. It had vanished without a trace. The disappearance of the Boeing 727 quickly escalated beyond a local aviation mystery. Within hours, intelligence agencies around the world were paying attention. A fully loaded commercial airliner, capable of carrying 10,000 gallons of fuel, had taken off without authorization, without communication, and without a clear destination. In the post-9/11 era, this was more than just a missing aircraft. It was a potential security threat. If the plane had been stolen, what was its purpose? Was it being repurposed for smuggling? A terrorist attack? A military operation? The questions mounted, but the answers were nowhere to be found. The U.S. government immediately launched an investigation. The CIA, FBI, and NSA began tracking any possible sightings, while the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, issued an international alert. Any Boeing 727 matching the stolen aircraft's description had to be stopped and searched. But stopping an aircraft that didn't want to be found was no easy task. Unlike modern jets, the 727 didn't rely on satellite-based tracking systems. Instead, it used older transponder technology, which meant whoever was flying, it could turn it off at any time, and that's exactly what had happened. With no transponder signal, the plane had disappeared from radar almost immediately after takeoff. That meant tracking it would rely on human eyes, pilots, airport workers, or intelligence sources who might spot an unfamiliar aircraft landing somewhere unexpected. Rumors began spreading. Some believed the 727 had landed at a remote airstrip in Africa, repainted and repurposed for illegal activity. Others suspected it had flown to South America, where criminal organizations could use it for smuggling. A few even speculated that it had been taken to a Middle Eastern country to be outfitted for a terrorist attack. But despite weeks of searching, no confirmed sightings ever surfaced. There were no satellite images, no recorded landings, just silence. For intelligence agencies used to tracking the world's most advanced military jets, the idea that a massive commercial aircraft could simply vanish was unthinkable. Yet somehow it had. The search for the missing Boeing 727 took a new turn as investigators focused on the why behind its disappearance. A plane this size doesn't just vanish, it has to go somewhere. But where? And more importantly, for what purpose? Authorities quickly latched onto the most alarming theory. The plane had been stolen for a future attack. In a world still on edge from 9/11, an untracked commercial jet loaded with thousands of gallons of fuel was more than a curiosity. It was a potential weapon. The FBI and CIA scoured international intelligence reports for any sign of the missing aircraft. Could it have landed at an unregistered airstrip in Africa? Had it been smuggled into a conflict zone for use in illicit operations? Or worse, had it been modified for an attack? U.S. officials issued a global security alert, warning that the missing 727 could be repainted and disguised as a commercial jet before being used in a terrorist plot. Every airport from South America to the Middle East was ordered to report any unusual, unregistered Boeing 727s. But there was another possibility, one less dramatic but just as puzzling. What if the plane had been stolen for profit? In the early 2000s, Africa's aviation industry was riddled with corruption. Stolen aircraft weren't uncommon, especially in regions where planes were used for illegal operations. Diamond smuggling, arms dealing, and even drug running. A Boeing 727, if properly hidden and repainted, could become an untraceable aircraft. Smugglers could use it for years, operating out of remote airstrips beyond the reach of law enforcement. Intelligence agencies turned their focus toward known criminal networks in Angola, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and South America. Was the plane hidden in a jungle airstrip, making illicit runs between continents? Or had it been dismantled for parts, piece by piece? Leads came in, but none led to the missing plane. No verified sightings, no satellite images, no answers. The idea that a massive, fuel-hungry commercial aircraft could operate in secrecy for this long seemed impossible. Yet, months passed, and still, nothing. It was as if the Boeing had simply ceased to exist. The deeper investigators looked, the stranger the case became. The theories about terrorism or smuggling made sense, but something wasn't adding up. How do you keep a Boeing 727, a plane nearly 50 meters long, hidden for so long? Some believed the aircraft had crashed into the Atlantic shortly after takeoff, possibly due to fuel mismanagement or pilot error. After all, neither Padilla nor Mutantu were certified to fly a 727 alone. If they had tried, the flight could have gone horribly wrong. But if the plane had crashed, Where was the wreckage? In aviation history, even deep-sea crashes leave behind something. Floating debris, an oil slick, radio transmissions, something. But in this case, there was nothing. No emergency beacons, no reports of wreckage washing up along the coast. Just silence. Then there was the idea that the plane had been dismantled for parts. A Boeing 727 was valuable, even if it wasn't in prime condition. Its engines alone were worth millions on the black market. If criminals wanted to strip it down and sell it piece by piece, they could. But where? Investigators searched for a hidden airstrip or facility where a 727 could be disassembled. Remote airports in Africa, illegal smuggling hubs in South America, anywhere a plane could be secretly torn apart. But again, nothing. No missing aircraft parts matching the plane's serial numbers ever surfaced. Then came the most bizarre theory. The plane was still flying. Some experts believed the 727 had been repainted and given a fake identity, allowing it to blend into international air traffic. In less regulated parts of the world, paperwork could be forged, flight plans fabricated, and an aircraft's past erased. Reports surfaced of suspicious Boeing 727s spotted in Guinea, Colombia, and even the Middle East. But every lead hit a dead end. None of them could be confirmed as the missing Angola aircraft. The lack of evidence only deepened the mystery. If the aircraft had been stolen for profit, why had it disappeared so completely? If it had crashed, why wasn't there a single trace of it? And if it was still out there, flying under a new identity, who was using it, and for what purpose? Months turned into years, and the missing Boeing 727 became something more than just a stolen plane. It became a legend. The case never truly went cold. There were always whispers, rumors of sightings, and theories that refused to die. A plane of that size couldn't just vanish. Someone, somewhere, had to know something. Then, in 2005, 2 years after the disappearance, an unregistered Boeing 727 was spotted in Guinea, West Africa. The sighting came from a private intelligence source, someone who had been tracking illegal aircraft movements in the region. The plane matched the description of the missing Angola jet. Same model, same modifications, but there was no way to confirm if it was the same aircraft. By the time authorities arrived, the plane was gone. Not long after, a second suspicious 727 was reported, this time in Colombia, a known hub for drug cartels and smuggling operations. Again, the details were vague. The aircraft had no verifiable records, and its ownership was a mystery. Could the missing plane have been repurposed for illegal operations? If so, who was flying it? Some former intelligence officers suggested that criminal networks had rebranded the 727, changing its tail number, repainting it, and using it for untraceable flights. A plane that didn't officially exist could be used to move drugs, weapons, or even people without detection. But these theories were just that, theories. No concrete evidence ever surfaced. No serial numbers were confirmed. And despite the occasional sighting, no government agency was ever able to intercept or identify the missing plane. At one point, aviation enthusiasts, conspiracy theorists, and even former pilots started forming their own networks, trying to track the aircraft. Online forums buzzed with speculation. Had the plane been hidden in a hangar, waiting to be used? Was it flying in a war zone, running supplies or weapons? Or had it been quietly destroyed, its parts scattered beyond recognition? Every time a new sighting emerged, hope flickered, but just as quickly, it faded. The Boeing remained a ghost, appearing and disappearing in whispers, but never in reality. The missing Boeing 727 wasn't just a plane anymore. It was a riddle with no answer. For years, aviation experts, intelligence agencies, and amateur sleuths chased rumors, hoping for a break in the case. But despite fleeting sightings and scattered theories, the real question remained. What happened to the two men suspected to be on board? The last known individuals connected to the stolen aircraft were Ben Charles Padilla, an American aircraft mechanic, and John Mutantu, a Congolese aviation technician. Neither was an experienced commercial pilot, and certainly neither was qualified to fly a 100-ton jet alone. So where did they go? Ben Padilla, the man at the center of the mystery. Of the two men, Ben Charles Padilla was the bigger mystery. A Florida-based aircraft mechanic, Padilla had been in Angola working on the Boeing 727 for months. He was hired to help restore the aircraft to flying condition, which meant he had intimate knowledge of its systems. He wasn't just a mechanic, though. He had some flight experience, though far below what was needed to operate the 727 safely. Padilla's family refused to believe he had stolen the plane on his own. His sister, Benita Padilla Kirkland, insisted that he was not a criminal and had no reason to steal the aircraft. In her eyes, something had gone terribly wrong. Ben had either been forced to take off or had been taken against his will. She believed he was dead. According to Padilla's family, the most plausible scenario was that someone else hijacked the plane, forcing Padilla to fly it before eventually disposing of him. But if that was the case, where was the wreckage? Where was the aircraft? The Mutantu enigma. Less was known about John Mutantu, the Congolese aviation technician also believed to be on board. Mutantu had no piloting experience and had only been working on the aircraft in a maintenance capacity. Unlike Padilla, Mutantu had no family or contacts advocating for him in the search. His name faded from most reports, and it seemed that whatever had happened to him was an afterthought in the larger mystery of the missing aircraft. If Mutantu had been involved, what was his role? Was he simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, or did he know more than anyone suspected? What if they never took off alone? There was always another possibility, that neither man had anything to do with the disappearance. Some theorists believed that a third party had been involved. Could a group of trained pilots have hijacked the aircraft, forcing Padilla and Mutantu to cooperate? Some details seem to support this idea. The aircraft took off smoothly, with no signs of struggle. It climbed westward into the Atlantic as if following a planned flight path. No distress signals or mayday calls were made. If Padilla had been piloting against his will, why hadn't he found a way to communicate with the tower? Was he already dead before takeoff? Others speculated that the aircraft had already been prepped for theft, and Padilla and Mutantu were mere pawns in a larger operation. If this was an organized crime effort, the true pilots could have been waiting nearby, taking control at the last moment. No bank activity, no calls, no traces. For months, investigators kept tabs on Padilla's finances, phone records, and personal connections. If he had stolen the plane, wouldn't he need money, new documentation, or a way to survive? Yet, nothing surfaced. No bank activity. No communication with his family. No confirmed sightings. If he was alive, he had vanished just as completely as the plane itself. This deepened the mystery even further. If he had stolen the aircraft willingly, where did he go? If he had been killed, where was the body? For all the governments, intelligence agencies, and independent researchers involved in the search, not a single solid clue led to his whereabouts. A pattern in aviation. Mysteries? Strangely, this wasn't the first time an aircraft had disappeared so completely. Amelia Earhart's disappearance in 1937 had left the world wondering for decades. Flight 19's loss in the Bermuda Triangle, 1945, still defied explanation. Even Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370, 2014, which vanished in modern times with all the world's tracking technology, still had major unanswered questions. Could the Boeing 727 disappearance be part of this long history of unsolved aviation mysteries? Or was it something entirely different? A theft or hijacking that simply succeeded? A final dead end. By 2004, the case had all but stalled. No governments reported the 727 landing in their jurisdiction. No wreckage surfaced. No black market parts were linked back to the missing aircraft. And most unsettling of all, Padilla and Mutantu were never heard from again. Their families never received closure. No remains were found. No records indicated they had started new lives under different identities. It was as if they had been erased. Even today, aviation experts still debate what happened that night in Angola. Was this a carefully planned operation, an accident that spiraled out of control, or something even stranger? No one knows for sure. And until someone, somewhere, finds that missing Boeing 727, the mystery will remain unsolved. In the quiet expanse of the Australian skies, where the vast blue meets the endless horizon, flying was more than just transportation. It was a profound expression of freedom. For 20-year-old Frederick Valentich, it was also a gateway to a future he dreamed of, one that combined his passion for aviation with a youthful fascination for the unknown, particularly his keen interest in unidentified flying objects. Frederick was not just an ordinary young man with a hobby. He was an ambitious pilot, albeit relatively inexperienced, with about 150 hours of flying time logged, a significant portion of which was solo. He was serious about turning his passion into a profession, aiming to qualify as a commercial pilot. However, his journey was marked by both enthusiasm and a few instances of overconfidence, as noted by his instructors and peers. Despite these minor setbacks, his commitment to flying was unwavering, driven by a deep-seated love for the skies. On October 21, 1978, Valentich prepared for a routine flight that was anything but ordinary. His plan was to fly from Moorabbin Airport in Victoria to King Island, a simple stretch across the Bass Strait. The purpose of the trip was partly practical. He was tasked with picking up some friends, and partly personal, a chance to log more flight hours under his belt. The weather that day was favorable, and everything seemed poised for a smooth journey. As he performed his pre-flight checks, Valentich's demeanor was calm and collected. Those who saw him that afternoon reported nothing out of the ordinary. He filed his flight plan, noting his route, expected time of arrival, and other standard details. The flight to King Island was supposed to be a straightforward one, with clear skies and gentle winds. But what transpired over the next few hours would turn this routine flight into one of Australia's most enduring mysteries. The aircraft Frederick chose for this flight was a single-engine Cessna 182, a reliable model known for its sturdy handling and forgiving nature in flight, qualities that made it a favorite among training schools and private pilots alike. This particular Cessna, however, was about to become famous not for its performance, but for its mysterious and sudden disappearance. With everything in order, Valentich took off from Moorabbin at approximately 6:19 p.m. The initial phase of the flight proceeded without incident. Valentich maintained regular contact with air traffic control, providing routine updates on his position as he crossed the coastline and headed out over the open water of the Bass Strait. However, as he neared the halfway point of his journey, his communications took a strange turn. He reported encountering another aircraft, which he described as exceedingly unusual in appearance. According to transcripts of his radio communications, Valentich was initially curious, then increasingly perturbed. He described the other craft as moving at high speed, and it seemed to toy with his Cessna, appearing overhead, then vanishing only to reappear from different angles. His descriptions grew more frantic, his voice tinged with confusion and alarm. Frederick's fascination with UFOs was well known among his circle. He often spoke of them not as mere science fiction, but as a genuine interest, fueled by a string of recent sightings reported across Australia. This context turned his flight into a narrative ripe for speculation and wonder, as he was now seemingly living his worst, or perhaps most thrilling, scenario. His last transmission was the most harrowing. "It is hovering, and it is not an aircraft," he reported. These words would be the last anyone would hear from Frederick Valentich. Moments later, the radio link crackled into static, and silence took over. Back at Moorabbin Airport, confusion reigned. Air traffic controllers scrambled to re-establish contact, but to no avail. As the minutes turned into hours, concern grew. Search and rescue operations were soon underway, marking the start of an extensive search that would captivate and mystify the world. Frederick Valentich's disappearance raised numerous questions. What did he see in the sky that evening? Was it a misinterpretation, or had he encountered something truly unexplainable? These questions haunted the investigation and would soon elevate the incident from a mere missing person case to a legend discussed and debated by aviators and UFO enthusiasts alike. Frederick Valentich's departure from Moorabbin Airport had been routine. The engines of his Cessna 182 hummed smoothly as he ascended into the early evening sky, leaving the familiar landscape of Victoria behind. His flight plan was straightforward: head southwest towards King Island, a speck of land nestled in the Bass Strait between Australia and Tasmania. It was a flight path he had considered carefully, suited to his experience level and the Cessna's capabilities. As Valentich settled into the cockpit, the world below him transformed. The urban sprawl gave way to the rugged, windswept coastline, and then to the open sea. Flying over water was a different kind of piloting experience, one that demanded constant vigilance and respect for the unpredictable nature of the ocean below. The first half of the flight passed uneventfully. Valentich maintained a steady altitude, checking his instruments routinely while keeping in contact with Melbourne's air traffic control. He reported his position methodically, confirming his progress and ensuring he was on track. The communication was standard procedure, a lifeline to the ground and a record of his journey's progress. However, as Valentich approached the midway point of his flight, something changed. It began subtly, an unscripted pause in his communications, a break in the rhythm that had defined the earlier part of his journey. Then, the tone of his transmissions altered. He contacted Melbourne Air Traffic Control with an unexpected report. He was not alone in the sky. Valentich's voice, usually calm and collected, carried a note of confusion as he described the other aircraft. It was, he reported, an unusual sight, faster than his Cessna and far more agile. The aircraft appeared to be playing a strange game, moving at high speed, ascending past him only to suddenly appear on a different side. Each report Valentich made grew more alarmed. The craft seemed to toy with him, darting in and out of his field of vision with baffling ease. As he tried to make sense of what he was seeing, Valentich continued to describe the aircraft's maneuvers to air traffic control. His descriptions were punctuated with attempts to identify the type of aircraft, but none fit. It wasn't behaving like any conventional airplane he knew. It didn't seem to adhere to the physical limitations of human-made aircraft. The situation escalated as Valentich reported that the aircraft had approached much closer. It hovered overhead, its movements unlike anything he had encountered before. This proximity allowed him to provide more detail about its appearance. It seemed to be metallic, shiny, and was emitting a green light. His voice conveyed a mixture of awe and distress. The aircraft's behavior and capabilities were unlike anything he had studied or heard about. This part of the flight, marked by these bizarre encounters, was critical. Valentich's focus shifted from navigation to dealing with the unexpected presence. Each transmission to Melbourne became more urgent, his sentences clipped as he struggled to maintain composure and control over his aircraft. The exchange reached a climax when Valentich expressed something more than surprise or confusion. There was a palpable tension in his voice. "It is hovering, and it is not an aircraft," he stated firmly, the final words that painted a picture of something beyond ordinary understanding. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the communication cut off. The line went dead, leaving only static in its wake. Melbourne Air Traffic Control frantically called out to Valentich, seeking clarification, any response to indicate that he was still there. But there was nothing, only the haunting silence of an open channel with no reply. The disappearance of Frederick Valentich had begun as an ordinary flight, a young pilot in pursuit of hours and experience. But as the sun set over the Bass Strait that evening, it turned into something entirely different, a mystery that would echo through the annals of aviation history. After the chilling final transmission from Frederick Valentich, the atmosphere in Melbourne's Air Traffic Control Centre shifted from routine oversight to acute crisis management. The young pilot's last report, unsettling in its content and abrupt in its conclusion, spurred immediate action from the concerned controllers. Valentich had been clear, albeit deeply troubled, in his last communication. He described an object hovering above him, which he distinctly stated was not an aircraft. His words were marked by a firmness that suggested he was seeing something extraordinary, something that defied his understanding as a pilot. The silence that followed his final transmission was ominous, turning the routine tracking of a small aircraft into a potential search and rescue operation. With no further contact from Valentich, the controllers wasted no time in deploying standard emergency protocols. Initially, they attempted to re-establish communication, hoping for any sign that Valentich was still airborne and simply experiencing radio difficulties. Repeated calls were made, each unanswered, only amplifying the urgency of the situation. As minutes turned into hours without any response, the scope of the operation expanded. The Australian authorities were notified, and a full-scale search and rescue mission was launched by the evening. The operation involved multiple assets, including aircraft and sea vessels, tasked with scouring the area of Valentich's last known position over the Bass Strait. The search teams faced daunting conditions. The Bass Strait, notorious for its unpredictable weather and rough seas, posed significant challenges. The vastness of the area, coupled with the fading light of dusk, further complicated the efforts. Search planes swept over the water, looking for any sign of Valentich or his Cessna, while boats combed the waves below. Despite the extensive resources deployed and the urgency of the search, no trace of Valentich or his aircraft was found that night. The search continued over the following days, with additional teams joining the effort. The Australian Maritime Safety Authority coordinated the operation, expanding the search area and utilizing more sophisticated technology, including radar and satellite imagery. The lack of physical evidence was perplexing. No debris, oil slick, or other typical indicators of an aircraft crash were evident. The sea and air search teams reported back only the emptiness of the open water and the unyielding silence of the sky. The search efforts persisted, driven by hope and the possibility that Valentich might have landed somewhere on the water and was waiting to be rescued. But as days passed with no sign of him or his aircraft, that hope began to wane. The official search operation would eventually be called off, leaving unanswered questions and profound concern for the young pilot's fate. The disappearance of Frederick Valentich became a focal point of intrigue and speculation. It catalyzed a series of investigations, discussions, and theories, both official and among the public. The mysterious circumstances, particularly the pilot's report of an unusual object, fed into broader discussions about unidentified flying objects and their possible interactions with aviation. This chapter of Valentich's journey concludes not with resolution, but with the stark reality of his vanishing, a moment in time that would forever be etched in the annals of Australian aviation mysteries. The silence from his radio on that fateful evening marked the beginning of a story that continues to provoke curiosity and debate to this day. As the reality of Frederick Valentich's disappearance settled in, the focus shifted entirely to a comprehensive search and rescue operation. Initiated by the Australian authorities, the operation spanned several days and involved numerous assets, drawing on a broad spectrum of air and sea resources to comb through the vast, treacherous waters of the Bass Strait. The search efforts were extensive and meticulously planned. Aircraft equipped with advanced radar and thermal imaging flew grid patterns over the area, while boats with sonar capabilities scanned the depths below. The goal was to cover as much area as possible, as quickly as possible, in the hope of finding any trace of Valentich or his Cessna 182. Despite the favorable weather conditions that followed the initial disappearance, the search teams faced the inherent challenges of the Bass Strait, known for its capricious weather patterns and strong currents. These conditions often made the search efforts difficult, with waves and wind disrupting the progress of boats and limiting the effectiveness of aerial searches during certain parts of the day. As the search continued, the Australian Maritime Safety Authority coordinated efforts from multiple agencies, including the Royal Australian Air Force, local volunteer marine rescue organizations, and even merchant vessels passing through the area. Each day, the teams would debrief, share findings, and adjust their strategies, determined to uncover any clue that could lead to Valentich. However, the days passed with frustratingly little to show for the efforts. No wreckage was sighted, and no signals were detected that could suggest the location of the crashed plane. The search teams expanded the search radius, hoping that drift patterns might have carried Valentich away from his last known location. Still, the vast ocean seemed to have swallowed all evidence of his passage. The lack of any physical evidence perplexed investigators and search crews alike. In cases of aircraft crashes at sea, some debris typically surfaces, whether from the impact itself or from the interior of the aircraft. Yet, in Valentich's case, the sea offered nothing. No floating debris, no oil slicks, no emergency locator transmissions, nothing that indicated a crash site. This complete absence of evidence led to an increased interest in Valentich's last communication. His report of an encounter with an unusual aircraft, described under clear distress, became a focal point for both official investigators and the public. The peculiar nature of his descriptions prompted some to speculate about otherworldly explanations, including UFO involvement, which only intensified as the search yielded no results. After 2 weeks of intensive searching, the official search and rescue operation was reluctantly called off. The decision was met with disappointment and a sense of defeat by those involved, especially given the emotional toll on Valentich's family and friends. The announcement marked a somber acknowledgement that the chances of finding Valentich alive, or even recovering his remains, were exceedingly slim. The cessation of the search did not end the public's fascination with the case, nor did it silence the myriad theories about what might have happened. Instead, it transitioned the incident from an active rescue operation to a lingering mystery, one that would captivate curious minds and fuel debates about aviation's safety, the unknown, and the unexplained. The story of Frederick Valentich's disappearance remained alive in the collective memory, a perplexing enigma of the skies that refused to be forgotten. With the official search for Frederick Valentich concluded and no tangible evidence found, the focus shifted from a rescue mission to the realm of speculation and investigation. The mysterious circumstances surrounding Valentich's last transmission led to a myriad of theories, each trying to make sense of the unexplained disappearance. Valentich's own interest in UFOs became a significant aspect of the public discourse surrounding his disappearance. His final communication with air traffic control, where he described an encounter with an unusual aircraft exhibiting extraordinary capabilities, naturally led to conjecture about extraterrestrial involvement. This theory was bolstered by reported UFO sightings in the area around the time of his flight. UFO enthusiasts and some members of the public embraced the possibility that Valentich had encountered an alien craft, which somehow led to his disappearance. These speculations were fueled by a broader global interest in UFOs, which in the late 1970s was still riding the wave of the post-Roswell fascination with flying saucers and government cover-ups. Skeptics of the UFO theory proposed more conventional explanations for Valentich's disappearance. Some aviation experts suggested that Valentich, possibly disoriented by the overwater flight at dusk, might have become the victim of spatial disorientation, a common hazard in aviation, particularly among less experienced pilots. This could have caused him to misinterpret what he saw, including mistaking his own aircraft's lights reflected on the water or on a layer of cloud as another craft. Another theory was that Valentich had staged his own disappearance. This stemmed from investigations into his background, revealing his fascination not only with UFOs, but also with stories of pilots disappearing or starting anew under a different identity. However, those close to Valentich, including family and friends, strongly disputed this, describing him as enthusiastic and serious about his aviation career. The possibility of a more mundane accident was also considered. Some speculated that Valentich's aircraft might have suffered a mechanical failure, or that he might have crashed into the sea after running out of fuel. However, the lack of debris and the absence of an oil slick on the water made this scenario seem unlikely unless the aircraft had sunk intact, a rare occurrence given the expected breakup on impact. The absence of hard evidence meant that no conclusive determination could be made. The Australian Department of Transport conducted an investigation, but its findings were inconclusive, citing a lack of sufficient information to reach a definitive explanation. The mystery of Valentich's disappearance had a lasting impact on aviation in Australia, leading to increased safety protocols and more rigorous training for pilots flying over water. The case also continued to be a topic of academic and investigative interest. Researchers and documentary filmmakers periodically revisited the story, each bringing new technology and theories to bear in the hope of uncovering new information, or perhaps one day finding physical evidence that could bring closure to the case. The Valentich disappearance remains a compelling story, not just for those involved in aviation and UFO studies, but for anyone intrigued by human interaction with the unknown. It serves as a cautionary tale about the limits of human perception and the mysteries that can arise when the familiar intersects with the unexplainable. As the years passed, the disappearance of Frederick Valentich continued to resonate not just within the aviation and UFO enthusiast communities, but also among the wider public as a compelling mystery of the unknown. The lack of closure and definitive evidence has kept the case alive in the form of books, documentaries, and continued discussions in various forums. Here, we examine the legacy and ongoing interest surrounding Valentich's mysterious flight. Frederick Valentich's case has become a cornerstone discussion in both aviation safety and UFO circles. For aviation professionals, it serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of potential disorientation and the vital importance of maintaining situational awareness, especially when flying over large bodies of water. The incident has been used in training seminars to educate pilots about the psychological and physical effects of flying under stressful conditions and the potential for misinterpreting visual cues in the vast and featureless landscapes like the sea. In the realm of UFO research, Valentich's disappearance is often cited as one of the most intriguing cases due to the pilot's own reported sightings and the circumstances of his last transmission. It continues to fuel debates about the possibility of otherworldly encounters, and has become a part of UFO lore, frequently referenced at conferences and in literature discussing human interactions with supposed extraterrestrial vehicles. New developments occasionally reignite interest in the Valentich disappearance. Advances in technology, such as satellite imagery and improved sonar capabilities, have prompted new searches in the Bass Strait and surrounding areas. Though these efforts have not yet produced any concrete results, they maintain public interest and hope that new evidence may eventually surface. Interest is also kept alive by the media, with periodic retrospectives and updates on the case. These often coincide with anniversaries of the event, drawing new attention from those previously unaware of Valentich's story. Each wave of interest encourages fresh looks at the available data, sometimes bringing new theories to light or re-examining old ones with new technology or methodologies. Researchers and theorists continue to explore less conventional explanations, driven both by the strange details of Valentich's last reported observations and by the absence of physical evidence. Discussions often involve the exploration of what an encounter with an advanced unknown technology might entail, and how it could lead to the disappearance of an aircraft without a trace. Such speculations delve into the limits of current human understanding of physics and technology, proposing scenarios where conventional retrieval and detection methods might fail. The Valentich case has also had a significant cultural impact, inspiring segments of films, television series, and literature. These portrayals explore the human aspect of the mystery, emphasizing the emotional and psychological effects on those involved, particularly Valentich's family and friends. They also examine the broader implications of a society grappling with phenomena that it cannot easily explain through current scientific understanding. The legacy of Frederick Valentich is a complex tapestry woven from threads of mystery, tragedy, and the unyielding human quest for answers. While the truth behind his disappearance may never be fully uncovered, the story continues to intrigue and inspire. It serves as a reminder of our perpetual fascination with the sky and what lies beyond, as well as the profound and sometimes haunting unknowns that remain in our own world. As long as the mystery remains unsolved, the legend of Valentich's flight will continue to captivate imaginations and stimulate curiosity across generations. On a warm summer morning in August 2005, the island of Cyprus was bustling with the usual tourist activity, its sunny beaches promising relaxation and the azure waters inviting a refreshing dip. At Larnaca Airport, the atmosphere was charged with the typical rush of international travel. Amidst the hustle, Helios Airways Flight 522 was preparing for its routine journey to Prague, with a scheduled stopover in Athens. The Boeing 737, a workhorse of the skies, stood ready on the tarmac, its engines quiet before the day's flight. The flight crew of Flight 522 arrived at the aircraft carrying their customary pre-flight checklists and personal effects. The captain, an experienced pilot with years of service under his belt, was known for his meticulous attention to procedure. Alongside him, the first officer, younger but equally competent, shared duties that ranged from checking the flight instruments to reviewing the weather conditions. Both men had flown this route numerous times, each trip uneventful, each landing routine. As passengers began boarding, the cabin crew, led by a seasoned flight attendant, welcomed them with practiced smiles and polite greetings. Families settling into their seats with young children in tow, business travelers opening laptops to catch up on emails, and vacationers eagerly discussing their plans, all formed the tapestry of the day's passengers. The boarding process proceeded smoothly, with the gentle hum of conversations filling the cabin, and overhead bins being carefully packed with carry-on luggage. While the passengers adjusted to their surroundings, the ground crew was busy with the final preparations. Fuel levels were checked and rechecked, luggage was loaded and secured, and the catering services stocked the galleys with meals for the journey. Outside, the hustle continued as ground operators signaled to each other, orchestrating the ballet of airport ground traffic. Back in the cockpit, the captain and first officer went through the pre-flight checklist with precision. They confirmed the flight path with air traffic control, set the aircraft's navigational systems, and conducted a final review of the plane's mechanical status. All systems were reported as functioning within normal parameters. With everything appearing in order, the captain made a routine announcement to the cabin, his voice calm and reassuring, informing passengers of the expected flight time and weather conditions en route. As the final checks were completed, the doors were sealed, and the cabin crew performed the last head count. The flight attendant briefed the passengers on safety procedures, demonstrating the use of seat belts, emergency exits, and oxygen masks, a standard precautionary measure that passengers listened to with varying degrees of attention. With clearance from the tower, the engines roared to life, breaking the morning calm. The aircraft vibrated gently as it began to taxi, the familiar sensations reassuring to frequent flyers and thrilling to those less accustomed to air travel. The Boeing 737 maneuvered towards the runway, its pace steady, the turn onto the runway smooth and practiced. Lined up with the runway, the aircraft paused for a final moment before the captain applied the throttles. The engines responded with a powerful surge, propelling the aircraft forward. As speed gathered, the familiar pull of gravity felt by every passenger marked the moment of takeoff. The landscape below shrank rapidly as the plane ascended into the clear morning sky, the coastline of Cyprus waving a silent goodbye. Helios Airways. Flight 522 was now airborne, climbing to its cruising altitude. The seatbelt signs flicked off, inviting passengers to move about the cabin. The flight attendants began their service, offering refreshments and attending to passenger needs. For everyone on board, the flight promised nothing out of the ordinary. A few hours in the air, a brief stop in Athens, and then onward to Prague. Yet, as the aircraft settled into its path across the Mediterranean, an unforeseen issue began to develop. One that would transform what should have been a routine flight into one of aviation's most puzzling mysteries. Unknown to those on board, a critical problem was emerging, one that involved the very air they breathed. As the minutes passed, the situation within the pressurized cabin started to deteriorate, setting the stage for a tragic sequence of events that would confound experts and shake the aviation industry to its core. As Flight 522 cruised smoothly over the picturesque Mediterranean Sea, the cockpit and cabin began to diverge into two very different realities. Within the cockpit, the first signs of trouble emerged subtly. The pilots noticed discrepancies in the cabin pressure warning system, a crucial system that ensures the air inside the aircraft remains breathable as it ascends into thinner atmospheres. A light flickered on the control panel, suggesting a potential malfunction in the pressurization system, but it was not immediately alarming to the experienced pilots. Assuming it might be a sensor error, a not uncommon issue, they attempted a reset of the system. Meanwhile, their conversation remained professional and calm, focused on troubleshooting the potential issue without undue concern. The reset appeared successful, and the warning light extinguished. With no further indications of malfunction, the pilots settled back into the routine of monitoring the flight's progress, discussing expected weather conditions in Athens, and occasionally exchanging light banter. Back in the cabin, the atmosphere was entirely different. Unbeknownst to the flight crew, the aircraft's pressurization system had failed to operate correctly despite the reset. As the plane climbed higher, the cabin altitude, the equivalent altitude inside the aircraft, began to rise, reducing the oxygen levels. This change was gradual, not immediately noticeable to the passengers or the cabin crew, who were busy with meal services and routine duties. The first real indication of something amiss came from the passengers themselves. Some began to feel symptoms of hypoxia, although they may not have recognized them as such. Hypoxia, a deficiency in the amount of oxygen reaching the tissues, starts with subtle symptoms like headache, dizziness, and fatigue. Symptoms easy to attribute to the normal stresses of air travel or a lack of sleep. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, the flight continued as planned. The aircraft had reached its cruising altitude and was now on autopilot, heading towards Athens. The pilots remained unaware of the developing crisis behind them, as communication between the cockpit and cabin had not yet conveyed any sense of urgency. The cabin crew, accustomed to dealing with minor passenger ailments, didn't immediately connect the dots between the various complaints. However, as the aircraft continued its journey, the situation escalated. More passengers began to show signs of discomfort. A child started crying, unable to articulate the nausea and headache overwhelming him. An elderly passenger felt severe dizziness and reached out for help from a flight attendant, who herself began to feel lightheaded and confused. It was then that the cabin crew started to realize that these were not isolated incidents. Concerned, the chief flight attendant tried to contact the cockpit. Yet, upon reaching the cockpit door, she found herself struggling with cognitive and physical symptoms of hypoxia. Her knocks on the locked cockpit door went unanswered as the pilots, now also succumbing to the same invisible threat, were losing their ability to perform critical functions. The flight deck had become an increasingly confused and disoriented environment. The captain and first officer, each experiencing the insidious onset of hypoxia, found it difficult to concentrate or understand the severity of their situation. Commands to check instruments and assess systems became sluggish and incoherent. As the situation deteriorated, the aircraft continued on its flight path, governed by the unyielding automation of the autopilot system. The disconnect between the helpless situation in the cabin and the serene, automated flight of the aircraft created a stark and tragic dichotomy. Without intervention, Flight 522 was on a steady course towards disaster, with every passing minute reducing the chances of a safe resolution. As Helios Airways Flight 522 continued its doomed trajectory across the sky, the aircraft's automated systems remained blissfully ignorant of the escalating crisis within. Guided by the autopilot, the plane maintained its course and altitude with robotic precision, flying over the expanse of the Aegean Sea towards the Greek mainland. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere grew increasingly dire. Passengers, now visibly struggling, were experiencing more severe symptoms of hypoxia. Confusion reigned, as many found it difficult to think clearly or move coherently. Parents attempted to comfort their children, who were crying or appearing unusually lethargic, while other passengers slumped in their seats, slowly losing consciousness. The flight attendants, trained for a variety of emergency situations, were also affected by the lack of oxygen. Their training did not prepare them for the creeping, invisible threat of hypoxia, which impaired their ability to recognize and respond effectively to the emergency. Attempts to administer oxygen from portable units proved futile, as the passengers' and crew's ability to operate the equipment waned. Back in the cockpit, the pilots were in a perilous state. The captain, struggling against the effects of hypoxia, displayed symptoms of confusion and disorientation, a condition marked by his inability to perform simple tasks or respond to the aircraft's warning systems. The cockpit voice recorder later revealed disjointed, nonsensical conversations between the pilots. Conversations that veered off into irrelevance, a stark testament to their deteriorated cognitive functions. As the aircraft approached Athens, air traffic controllers became alarmed by the lack of communication from Flight 522. Repeated calls to the aircraft went unanswered, breaking standard protocol and escalating concern on the ground. Standard procedure for such silence typically triggers a state of emergency, and Greek air traffic control swiftly moved to implement these protocols. At this juncture, the Greek military was alerted to the potential threat of an unresponsive aircraft entering Athens's airspace, a scenario fraught with post-9/11 security implications. Fighter jets were scrambled from a nearby airbase, tasked with intercepting the Boeing 737 to assess the situation from a closer vantage point. The fighter pilots quickly located Flight 522, observing it from their cockpits. What they saw was chilling. Through the Boeing's cockpit windows, they noted the pilots' seats empty, or the pilots themselves seemingly incapacitated. This visual confirmation of the crew's condition heightened the urgency of the situation, transforming the mission from a simple intercept to a potential rescue operation. Despite the severity of the situation, the autopilot kept the aircraft in a holding pattern over Athens, as programmed for situations when landing clearance is not immediately available. The system's design to maintain flight parameters in lieu of human control was a testament to aviation safety design. Yet in this scenario, it only prolonged the inevitable. As the fighter jets accompanied the ghostly flight, they relayed real-time observations back to ground control, painting a grim picture of a plane effectively flying itself, with no conscious human guidance. The realization dawned on everyone involved that the passengers and crew of Flight 522 were likely beyond help. On the ground, emergency services were placed on high alert, and the airport prepared for the possibility of having to handle a plane, making an uncontrolled landing. A scenario fraught with potential danger, not only to those on board, but also to people on the ground. Meanwhile, in the skies, the limited fuel supply was nearing its end. The engines, which had been running smoothly throughout the flight, began to sputter as the fuel tanks edged closer to empty. This change marked the beginning of the end for Flight 522. As fuel depletion became imminent, the aircraft's engines started to fail, one by one. This loss of power finally disengaged the autopilot, shifting the aircraft from its steady holding pattern to an uncontrolled descent. The ghost flight, now in its final moments, was about to meet its tragic end. This sudden descent marked a catastrophic turn in the flight's narrative. A plane full of incapacitated passengers and crew, doomed to crash. The descent was rapid, the aircraft spiraling downward, pulled inexorably by gravity as it headed toward the rugged terrain north of Athens. The situation, which had started as a series of manageable anomalies, had spiraled into an uncontrollable disaster, highlighting the fine line between technological reliance and the critical need for human oversight in the complex domain of aviation. As Helios Airways Flight 522 descended uncontrollably toward the mountains north of Athens, the situation on the ground shifted into high gear. Greek military had already scrambled F-16 fighter jets to intercept the unresponsive airliner, providing essential visual confirmation that the crew appeared incapacitated. This stark revelation intensified the efforts of all involved, transitioning from a potential hijack or technical failure scenario to an imminent disaster management operation. At the military base, the control room buzzed with activity. Senior officers coordinated closely with civil aviation authorities and emergency response teams, mapping out potential crash zones and strategizing the best immediate response. The military's primary concern was to monitor the aircraft's path and communicate any sudden changes to air traffic control, which was simultaneously trying to clear airspace and manage inbound and outbound flights with heightened security protocols. The F-16 pilots maintained a visual on the Boeing 737, observing its erratic flight path. Their reports were grim. The aircraft's altitude was decreasing rapidly, and its maneuvers were uncoordinated and indicative of a complete loss of control. They described the plane's movements as erratic, with sudden drops in altitude and sporadic turns. The pilots relayed their observations in real time, providing crucial updates every few seconds. On the ground, the mood among the emergency response teams was tense. The Hellenic National Meteorological Service provided real-time weather data to ensure that rescue and recovery operations could be planned with the most accurate environmental information available. Fortunately, the weather conditions were clear, which was one less variable to complicate the already dire situation. At Athens International Airport, the Emergency Operations Center was activated. This included representatives from the fire department, medical teams, police, and airport management. They coordinated closely with the National Disaster Response Team to mobilize all available resources. Hospitals in and around Athens were put on high alert, and emergency medical teams, including ambulances and helicopter units, were prepped and ready to move out as soon as the crash site was confirmed. The real-time communication between the fighter jets and the control center was critical. As the F-16 pilots observed, the 737 began a final fatal descent, and the control room relayed this information to all emergency services. There was now an acceptance that the mission had transitioned from interception to recovery. The crash was imminent, and the focus was on saving as many lives as possible in the aftermath. The Greek Air Force and civil aviation authorities worked in concert to track the aircraft's descent path, using radar and the pilot's visual reports to predict the point of impact. This data allowed emergency services to position themselves strategically, optimizing response times to the expected crash site. As the 737 approached the ground, the fighter pilots observed one engine flame out, followed shortly by the second. The aircraft, now devoid of power, was a gliding hulk of metal, descending faster toward the terrain below. The pilots relayed these observations, their voices tense but controlled. Understanding their report carried grave implications. With every passing moment, the aircraft lost altitude, and the mountains north of Athens loomed closer. The fighter pilots could only watch in despair as the airliner they had been escorting, now silent and ghostly, dipped below the ridgeline and disappeared from sight. The impact was not seen, but the sudden silence on the radar confirmed the crash. The impact site was in a rugged area, difficult to access by road, which complicated the initial response. Helicopters were dispatched immediately, carrying search and rescue teams equipped with medical supplies, extraction tools, and first aid equipment. The response teams knew the chances of finding survivors were slim, given the nature of the crash and the condition of the passengers as last observed, but they remained resolute in their duty to provide any possible aid. Ground teams mobilized in all-terrain vehicles, navigating the challenging landscape to reach the site. Coordination was maintained via radio, with updates on their progress relayed back to the control center. The operation was a grim race against time, with each team member aware of the critical nature of their mission. Upon arrival at the crash site, the scene was devastating. The aircraft had disintegrated upon impact, with debris scattered across a wide area. The emergency teams began the grim task of searching through the wreckage, looking for any signs of life or recoverable bodies. The operation, carried out under the harsh shadows of the mountain, was methodical and respectful, each step taken with a profound sense of duty and sorrow. Back at the control center and across Greece, the nation held its breath, mourning the tragic loss and bracing for the toll of casualties. The crash of Flight 522 would leave a deep scar on the country's psyche, prompting immediate questions about aviation safety, emergency response protocols, and the measures necessary to prevent such a disaster in the future. As dawn broke over the rugged terrain north of Athens, the site where Helios Airways Flight 522 had met its tragic end lay eerily quiet. The once pristine aircraft was now a disfigured mass of twisted metal and scattered debris, painting a grim picture against the backdrop of the Greek mountainside. The initial shock of the disaster was slowly giving way to the somber reality of the rescue and recovery operations now fully underway. Emergency responders were among the first on the scene, their arrival marked by the rhythmic thud of helicopter blades cutting through the morning air and the distant rumble of all-terrain vehicles navigating the rough paths. These teams, composed of seasoned rescue personnel, medical staff, and fire and safety officers, were met with a scene of devastation. The aircraft had impacted with such force that it was immediately clear the chances of finding survivors were slim. The area was cordoned off as a secure zone to allow for an organized search and recovery effort. Teams methodically sifted through the wreckage, looking for any signs of life, although hope waned with each passing hour. Body recovery teams worked with respect and care, meticulously documenting the scene and recovering the remains of the passengers and crew who had perished. As the sun climbed higher, the full scale of the tragedy became apparent. The impact of the crash had spread debris over a large area, complicating the search efforts. Personal effects, a child's toy, a woman's scarf, a man's briefcase, were strewn amidst the twisted remnants of the fuselage, each item a poignant reminder of the lives abruptly ended. Meanwhile, at the makeshift command center set up near the crash site, investigators from the Greek Air Accident Investigation and Aviation Safety Board began their meticulous work. Their task was daunting: to piece together the events that led to the crash from the physical evidence at hand and the data retrieved from the aircraft's flight recorders, known colloquially as the black boxes. These devices, crucial to the investigation, were among the first items searched for amidst the wreckage. The black boxes, once recovered, were immediately transported to an analysis facility where experts began to extract and interpret the flight data and cockpit voice recordings. The data revealed a chilling timeline of the aircraft's final moments, including the loss of cabin pressure and the crew's incapacitating hypoxia. The voice recorder captured the pilot's increasingly confused and disoriented communication, painting a harrowing picture of their final struggle. Back in Athens, the tragedy had already begun to dominate the media, with continuous coverage broadcasting the grim details to a nation in mourning. The public's grief was palpable, compounded by a growing demand for answers and accountability. How had a routine flight turned into one of the country's worst aviation disasters? What failures in protocol or oversight could have allowed such a tragedy to occur? In response to the mounting public pressure, the Greek government announced the formation of an official commission to investigate the crash. This body was tasked with not only determining the causes of the disaster, but also recommending changes to prevent future tragedies. The investigation was to be thorough, transparent, and wide-ranging, involving experts from various fields of aviation and safety. As the days turned into weeks, the investigation deepened. Experts examined every aspect of the flight, from the maintenance records of the aircraft to the training and background of the crew. They scrutinized the airline's operational procedures and the actions of the air traffic control personnel. Each layer peeled back added complexity to the understanding of the crash, pointing to a confluence of technical failure, human error, and systemic issues in aviation oversight. The crash of Flight 522 thus became a catalyst for change in the aviation industry, both within Greece and internationally. It highlighted the critical importance of rigorous safety protocols, the need for continuous oversight and improvement in aircraft design and maintenance, and the vital role of effective communication and emergency response planning. As the investigation continued, the families of the victims began their own, more personal journey through grief and loss. Memorials were held, both in Greece and in the home countries of the passengers and crew, where communities came together to mourn and remember the lives lost. The legacy of Flight 522, marked by both tragedy and the lessons learned in its aftermath, would resonate in the annals of aviation history, serving as a somber reminder of the stakes involved in the complex interplay of human factors and technological reliance in modern air travel. As the investigation into the crash of Helios Airways Flight 522 continued, it became a focal point for profound changes in the aviation industry, not only in Greece, but across the globe. The months following the disaster saw an intense scrutiny of airline operational procedures, aircraft maintenance practices, and pilot training programs. The final report, when released, did more than just elucidate the tragic sequence of events. It prompted a serious reevaluation of how airlines and aviation authorities address safety and compliance. The comprehensive analysis conducted by the investigative commission revealed a series of failures that led to the crash. The primary issue was identified as a failure in the pressurization system, which was not correctly set for flight. This mistake, compounded by a series of miscommunications and oversight failures, led to the cabin atmosphere becoming hypoxic. Critically, the report highlighted that the flight crew missed several standard checks and did not adequately respond to the warning signals indicating a pressurization problem. Furthermore, the investigation pointed to deficiencies in the airline's training programs, particularly in emergency preparedness and response to pressurization issues. It became evident that the crew's incapacitation was due to a lack of oxygen, something that could potentially have been mitigated with better training and adherence to protocol. The findings led to immediate actions by aviation authorities in Greece and beyond. Regulatory bodies intensified their oversight of airline operational procedures, placing greater emphasis on compliance checks and safety audits. Training programs for cabin and flight crews were overhauled to include more rigorous simulations of emergency scenarios, including pressurization failures. Internationally, the crash spurred regulatory agencies to enhance the requirements for aircraft maintenance checks. There was a renewed focus on ensuring that all safety systems, especially those related to cabin pressurization, were not only fully operational, but also regularly checked and double verified. In response to the disaster, there were calls for better technology to monitor the cabin environment actively. Advances were made in cockpit alert systems to ensure that warning signals could not be missed or misunderstood by flight crews, regardless of their workload or stress levels. Additionally, policies were implemented that required more frequent and detailed communication between pilots and ground control, especially concerning aircraft system status and any deviations from normal flight operations. Beyond the technical and procedural enhancements, the Helios Flight 522 tragedy led to a cultural shift within the aviation industry. There was a renewed emphasis on safety culture, encouraging transparency, accountability, and continuous improvement. Airlines began to invest more heavily in crew resource management training, focusing on communication, decision-making, and teamwork in the cockpit. The victims of Flight 522 were memorialized in several poignant ceremonies and permanent memorials in Greece and Cyprus, serving as a somber reminder of the lives lost. These memorials also function as symbols of the commitment to aviation safety, reminding everyone in the industry of their responsibilities. Families of the victims found some solace in scholarships and foundations set up in memory of their loved ones, aimed at improving safety in aviation through research and education. These initiatives helped to channel their grief into efforts that could prevent future tragedies. The legacy of Helios Airways Flight 522 is twofold. It is a story of a tragic loss, a reminder of the potential human cost of oversight and error in complex systems. But it is also a story of learning and adaptation, a testament to the aviation industry's capacity to evolve and enhance safety in response to its failures. The changes implemented in the wake of the crash have undoubtedly saved lives, making air travel safer for millions of passengers around the world. As years pass, the lessons learned from Flight 522 continue to influence aviation practices and safety standards, ensuring that the memory of those lost informs a commitment to vigilance, excellence, and care within the industry.